Well, I can honestly say I never thought I'd be writing one of these. If I do a good job telling the story, you can blame it on my pal Andy. He's the one who put me up to this. So I guess... I guess I need a little backstory. My name's Ethan Hart. I'm 32 years old, divorced father of 3, volunteer firefighter here in North Haven County. If you don't know where that is, take out a map of Penn State. Close your eyes near the top Potter County and then toss a dart to the east area. You probably found us. In other words, we're nothing special here. I live on the south side of the county in Dewsbury, a scenic little town where everybody knows everybody. You get to decide if it's a good thing or not. Anyway, the VFD services the whole county because the population, well, it ain't but like 3,000 at the most. Although I think recently we've had to ask for a little assistance here and there from close by counties to handle brush fires in the hot season. On a typical day, though, there's normally about 3-4 guys at the firehouse, and then the rest of us are all on call. The day this particular call came in, I was actually supposed to take Brandon, my oldest, fishing over in Lake Verdus. Ryan, our fire chief, knows that when any of the other guys call in sick, that I'll pick up the slack if needed. Oh, for Paxton Heights. I wish I'd never answered the phone. Didn't actually know what we were heading into. Downtown Williamsport. I didn't actually know that we were headed to downtown Williamsport until I got to the firehouse. Everyone else was loading up engine 3 to roll out. Fucking business committee needs to just shut the electricity off in the damn place if you ask me, Andy said as he grabbed his coat and got in the back of the truck. Yeah, I knew exactly what he meant just from the remark alone. The place was a beat-down, crummy hot spot for homeless junkies and gangs, smack dab in the middle of town by the riverbed. It's 5 stories tall, and honestly, it's seen more electrical fires in 3 years than most of us can count. I think the only reason that it's even still standing is thanks to the brick and mortar and the foundation of the place. I figured this would be another routine call, but well, yeah, I guess I'm jumping the gun, huh? Sorry, like I said, I just don't know how to get these thoughts out here fluidly, because it's so crazy. When we got there, I could tell immediately the fire had probably been raging for about an hour. This wasn't going to be a quick fix like the last one. Sam parked the truck on the east side of the road, and Andy took the ladder as the rest of us started putting up road barriers. 2 passing motorists were stopping to get a gander or a snapshot at the fire, so I made it my job to try and keep them in from getting too close. Jerry grabbed the hose to get it to the fire hydrant at the street corner as I glanced up above and saw Andy get into the 3rd-story window. That was where the majority of the smoke was coming from, so it made sense to see if we could cull the fire near the source first. Engine 3, what's your 20? I heard Rick ask across our 2-way. Here at the heat, Sam shouted back. I got a couple of calls from the neighboring buildings. Say they saw a few kids wandering near the old lobby. Might want to check it out. Ryan bellowed back. Art, you up? Sam yelled. Jerry waved for me to go inside while he took point with the hose and crowd. The entrance to the apartment was literally a dumpster diver's paradise. And an inferno waiting to happen. If the blaze decided to travel down here, I said a prayer like I always do. Then went head deep into hell. I pushed open the wide doors and looked around the lobby trying to gauge the area. Art to base. I'm on floor 1. Negative on any stragglers, I said to my radio as I started checking the nearby lounges. There wasn't anything at first. As I stood there in the lounge looking at the vending machines, I did notice what appeared to be a long trail of smoke seeping out of the floor near the outlets. As I raised my flashlight to get a better look, call me crazy, but it seemed like it moved when the light got close. I stood there for another minute, staring at it, when I got a call from Andy that jolted me back to reality. I got structural damage on 3, and I sent 2 girls trying to make it to the south stairs. I'm gonna have to get out or it'll give way. Roger that, I'll find a way up, as I said as I raced towards the main lobby again. I could feel the heat starting to push down from the 2nd floor, like a wave battering ashore that I wondered how long it would be before this place was done. Hart, you got 2 minutes that I want you out of there! Ryan. I knew he was just going by the book, but I wasn't about to let 2 kids burn to death on my watch. The door near the south stairs was bolted. I took out my axe, started bashing against the thing. I kept hearing this jarring, strange noise from above like an echo. Figured it must have been the girls. I ignored any chatter on the radio as I smashed the door to pieces and began to climb. Part of the stairs was already collapsed just from age. I heard the whispers again. "Stay where you are!" I shouted. I used every bit of my strength to climb over the collapsed stairs as the noises got louder. It sounded like the shuffling of feet. I kept going. The fire would be there in less than a minute, and I knew I had to save those kids. I stopped near the next step and saw one girl just huddled behind a stack of old boards, trying to keep from the blaze. "I'm gonna get you out of here," I told her. I extended my hand, and the timid girl grabbed it as we began to move back towards the stairs. Going down wasn't an option later, as several piles of debris fell from above and the girl clung to me. She squealed and shivered as we moved to the second floor, and I frantically searched for an exit. "Engine 3! I got one I need to get out! Get the ladder near the west side of the building!" I shouted at my partners. The fire was everywhere here, crossing the old walkway like a relentless wave of death. I kept the kid behind me. She barely had any clothes on or even shoes. Even getting out was going to be nothing but a pain for her. Then I heard another sound from the next hallway, and we moved together to investigate. The second girl was pinned under a collapsed beam, and I gave out several quick orders to the first. "Move over there! Stay near the window! My partners are coming to get you!" I knelt down to check for any immediate injuries, and then pushed the beam off slowly, turning her over. She was coughing, and I swear, it seemed like smoke was coming out of her mouth. I looked up towards the doorway where I had first told the girl to stay, but she was gone. The second girl grabbed at me, and I found myself mesmerized by her eyes. Smoke was moving under her irises and out of her mouth as she tried to talk. I saw Andy coming in through the doorway. Hart! Hart! What the hell are you doing? Let's go! I turned to tell the girl we needed to move, only to see that I was staring at an empty floor. Only smoke seemed to remain where she once had been. Suddenly, above me, another beam collapsed. It hit my ribs as it came down on me, and I heard Andy shout a few cuss words. The fire was growing larger now, pinning us down in the hallway. "Did you see them? Where did you go?" I asked frantically as Andy tugged at me toward the window. "Get a grip, Hart! We have to get out of here!" I looked down the hallway, watching as two small bodies danced in the smoke. I felt a rough blow to my head as we tried to push through the rising blaze, and when I came to, I was in the Mother Bella County Clinic with a few stitches and bruises and a very angry fire chief glaring down at me. "Hart, I could have taken you off duty for the stunt you pulled today." I didn't bother explaining what had happened. I found out a little later as I watched the news that Rosedale's company came to help us, managed to get the blaze under control by 4 that afternoon. Andy came by an hour later and gave me a piece of his mind. "The hell happened in there?" "Look, I was just trying to save those kids." "What kids? What are you talking about?" "There were twin girls on floor 2, right before the big collapse. I had one of them near me." Andy shook his head. "Hart, you were alone. Wasn't nobody there. No bodies were pulled." I frowned in confusion as he told me that. Brian gave me a few days off to clear my head. Last thing that I really need right now, but I insisted to Andy that I saw them. "Must have gotten out on their own," my buddy told me as he shook his head in disgust. I flipped the channels, trying not to let it get to me about the girls. Then I paused. I saw another update about the fire. "That's them! That's them! Right there!" I said, pointing to the photos, the ones that the news crew were showing. Andy grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. "Appears that the fire started near apartment 330, which of course has given rise to new speculation about the Covington murders," the broadcaster said. "Shit." What? What is it?" "Those are the kids?" "Definitely." "Dude. They died 5 years ago." I froze and looked at the pictures. "They were locked in the place. Burned alive." I really think I'm gonna need more than 5 days to clear my head. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and thanks for listening to tonight's story. I really want to encourage you guys to take a look at the description, which I know that's not something you guys do on YouTube or on podcasts, but hear me out, okay? In the description of every single video that I've ever done, there's always going to be a link over to where you can find more from the author of the story. And I'm suggesting that you guys check them out because, let's be honest, without the authors, there are no creepypasta stories. I mean, yeah, I'm pretty sure I could be on here and tell you guys the cookie dough recipe off the back of a Chips Ahoy, but that's not going to be nearly as interesting. So seriously, if you guys are listening here on YouTube, or if you're listening on Spotify, or iTunes, or Google Play, then take a look. I also want to give a great big thank you to Andrew Steinberg, Andreas Solvik, The Ginger Bros, Dante Rao, Chompski, Melissa Sweigart, Sindee Barney, TheRedOakShieldVirus, Gabrielle de Baca, Asia, Tyler Ramberg, Nicholas Saeid Alyain, Brianna Van Tine-Janzen, Ken Lando Higuchi, Erik Mary, Daniel Poulsen, Trace Miles, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, and Wayne Milstead. These guys are the big boys over on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, which you can always go to if you'd like to help support me and the show. That's it for tonight, guys, and sweet dreams. Everyone has that one terrifying nightmare from their childhood. One they still remember. But what happens when they find out that it's real? When my brother James and I were growing up, our family lived in an old Victorian-style home located in Massachusetts. It was a beautiful tribute to the profound craftsmanship of the early 20s. Picture a life-size rustic dollhouse with an absolutely stunning part-glazed timber frame porch. It was also very secluded, with our nearest neighbor being maybe a mile away. We'd spend most of our days outside in the treehouse that our father built, made up stories about pirates, treasure. I was always Blackbeard, while James would be Calico. We were the unstoppable duo of the high seas. There was a special hole in the middle of the tree where we'd hide our stolen treasures. James had noticed it the very first day after the fort was built. As exciting as our treehouse was, though, I have to say the very best part about our home was our nanny. She was so thoughtful and fun. Best nanny any child could ask for, really. During the rainy days, she'd often sit with us in our room, telling us stories as she rocked in the chair. Some were a little different that I remembered. For instance, she'd tell us the story about the little deer named Bambi. Now, it wasn't the mother who'd been killed. Instead, it was Bambi himself. She'd always remind us that we needed to listen to our parents, so monsters like the hunters couldn't hurt us. No, she really did care. At night, we'd hear a soft humming sound that echoed throughout our whole room. It would lull us to sleep, enveloping our minds with such a calmness. We barely had any dreams, only that soft, sweet hum from Nanny. Some nights, though, James and I would startle awake, both having had the same nightmare. Frequently, it involved not being able to breathe, as if someone had placed a bag over our heads, shut off our air supply somehow. We'd always wake up right before we died, hands on our throats, as we were coughing away the night terror. The mornings after these episodes, we'd always find a note for us left by Nanny. Couldn't quite make out all the scribbles, but we were sure I caught the word sorry. She always knew she wanted us to be happy. Forget about the terrible shadows that haunted our minds. We'd often tell our parents about Nanny, how she was so kind, leaving us notes in the night. They'd often comment on how feverish our imaginations were, also adding in how we needed to stop getting into the craft bin without asking. Honestly, I think that they were just jealous that we were both so fond of Nanny. Quickly become our favorite person over the years. I remember the first time I brought a girl home. Her name was Gemma, and she had the cutest dimples. I was about 15 years old at the time, just learning all the ins and outs of young love. I thought we were going to grow up, get married. I wanted nothing more than Nanny's approval. When her mother pulled up to the driveway to drop her off, I couldn't contain myself. "Nanny, she's here," I remember yelling, before I bounded out the door to greet Gemma. As we made our way up to the front steps, I half expected Nanny to be waiting for us, just on the other side of the door, and when she wasn't there, I grew worried. I told Gemma to wait in the kitchen for me while I went searching for her, but to my utmost disappointment, Nanny was nowhere to be found. The night dragged on after that. All I could think of was my dear friend. Why didn't she want to meet Gemma? Did she know something I didn't? Unfortunately, it left such a bad taste in my mouth, I never asked, and Gemma was the last girl I ever brought home. James and I eventually grew up. We moved out of our family abode, leaving poor Nanny behind. We could feel her sadness as we packed up our bags on what would be our last night home. We both took the time to each write Nanny a goodbye letter, ones that we placed on our nightstands. We knew that she'd appreciate that later. We got an apartment together in the city. Boy, was it different. We both received full rides to Boston University, each taking on a different major. I had decided that I wanted to be a teacher, while James was interested in engineering. He was more interested in getting his hands dirty, I guess. The schoolwork was time-consuming, but we never forgot about Nanny. Years later, I was going to write my college thesis on my childhood, and how I was basically raised by Nanny. While looking up our childhood home, I stumbled across an article online, written about the original family that lived there in 1915. A mother, a father, 2 little ones, and their Nanny. Our Nanny. My head began to spin as I inspected the article more thoroughly. Was this the same woman? How is that possible? I was confused, but I guess a little excitement was there to learn all I could about the woman, or I guess the spirit, who had helped raise both my brother and myself. I nostalgically thought to myself, maybe she missed the kiddos from her previous family. That's why she took good care of us. I couldn't have been more wrong. The word murderer caught my eye, and I quickly scanned down the article, mortified at what I was reading. A lump began to form in the back of my throat as my heart sank deep into my chest. The article reported how the nanny had lost both her children due to the negligence of a drunk driver in 1913, never having been able to properly cope with the deaths since she actively searched for the monster that had stolen her babies' lives. That's when she became employed by the Dobsons. On her journey for revenge, she had taken care of the mother's children as if they were her own. Until that dreadful night when she murdered the 2 sleeping babes. She smothered them with a pillow, most likely singing to them, ever so sweetly as she did. After they had died, the article stated that the nanny had written what appeared to be a suicide letter and left it next to their bodies. She then killed herself. At the very bottom was a photo of the backyard, same one in which my brother and I used to play. In the middle was the tree that our fort had been built upon. As I looked closer, I noticed our treasure hole, only it looked different. It was covered in a deep crimson red, one that made my own blood run cold. And next to that tree was the lifeless body of our nanny. Gun still in hand. Cooper jostled slightly in his seat as the pickup truck bounced its way down the countryside road. The asphalt has long since faded, giving way to cracks and bumps that marred its surface. As the vehicle cruised down the road, he looked out his window at the fields that flashed by. Rows of corn passed hypnotically by his gaze as his destination drew near. He peered into the rearview mirror to see his stepson Andrew, staring out the window as well. The teenager's blonde hair danced in the air. They were streaming through the cracks near the top of the window. Cooper's gaze was suddenly diverted back to the front of the cab as his wife placed her hand over his while he gripped the gear shift. Susan gave him a warm smile, squeezed his hand. You know, you really didn't need to take the afternoon off to come with us here. We could have just come next time you were free from work, Susan said. Cooper grinned as he continued to stare out the windshield. We both needed a break. I know all three of us missed spending afternoons out here with Gunnar. Susan let out a little chuckle that was nearly lost in the wind through her open window, and the static-laced song emitted from the radio. Finally, Cooper let out under his breath. The familiar white farmhouse Gunnar inhabited came into view over the top of some low-lying bushes. Cooper let off the accelerator, causing the truck to slow down before turning into the gravel driveway. As they drew closer to the familiar home, rocks crunched under the tires, and the smell of freshly cut grass entered through the open windows. Andrew perked up in his seat as his eyes went wide. You didn't tell me we were going to go visit Uncle Gunnar, he exclaimed without any hesitation to keep the excitement from his tone. Cooper chuckled and glanced at him in the rearview mirror. If I told you in advance, you would have been bugging me the whole way here on how much longer it's going to be. Andrew had now tuned out his stepfather's voice and had his face pressed against the window. With one final press of the brakes, Cooper brought the truck to a halt at the passenger side facing the front door, and as if on cue, the screen door was flung open and Gunnar's tall, slender frame stepped out into the sunlight. He wiped the palms of his hand on the front of his pants before outstretching his arm into a welcoming embrace. Oh, I was wondering when you all would get here, Gunnar let out as Andrew threw open the door to the truck. He bolted across the narrow span of grass that stood between the front steps of the house and the driveway. Andrew shook Gunnar's hand and pulled the man into a hug. I know it's only been a couple of months since you were last here, but I could swear you've grown at least another inch. Figured you would have stopped growing at your age. I'll give you a run for your money. Maybe I'll make 6 foot by the end of the summer, Andrew let out as a joke. Gunnar rustled his hair and looked up as Cooper stepped out of the truck, walked in the direction. They shook hands. But Cooper quickly found himself being pulled into a bear hug. You should know better than to greet me with a basic handshake, Gunnar said, as his voice trailed off into laughter at the end of the sentence. He let go of Cooper as Susan approached with a large smile across her face. Gunnar bent down slightly to reach her height and embraced her as well. It's been a good few months since I've seen you as well. Oh, my job keeps me busy most of the time. Trust me, it's nothing I'd been wanting more than just to come out here and relax sometimes. Gunnar nodded and turned to Andrew, who was now swaying back and forth on the porch swing. You know, Andrew, Gunnar called out, new calf was just born earlier this week. Why don't you and your mama go over to the stables and have a look? Almost your dinner time anyway. Still remember how to feed the newborns we took care of last summer. Andrew nodded with excitement before bolting down the front steps in a long stride and taking off in the direction of the stables on the other side of the property. Susan shook her head with a grin before walking behind him. Boy's 16. Still gets excited as a child when he comes here, Susan said with a laugh as she quickened her pace to catch up with him. Once the two were out of earshot, the smile slowly started to fade from Gunnar's face as he turned to look at Cooper. I have a feeling I know what this is about, he said with a concerning neutrality to his tone. Cooper kept his gaze on Andrew and Susan as they continued towards the stables. Day was gonna come eventually, Gunner. Cooper took a deep breath as a cool breeze blew across the property.
Yeah, I wish I had a little more time to prepare my answer properly.
Gunner let out. He walked back up the front steps with the boards squealing under his weight. Cooper followed close behind.
Go ahead, have a seat, make yourself comfortable. I'll fix us each a drink. I have a feeling we're going to need one, at least, over the course of this conversation.
Cooper let his body collapse into the cradle of the rocking chair, kicking his feet up on the railing as he slowly pulled himself forward and back, as he listened to Gunner fooling around in the kitchen. After a couple minutes, he stepped back outside with a glass in each hand. White Russians? Cooper asked with an amused hint of surprise in his tone. My God, you really are old-fashioned. Cooper took the glass and stirred the liquors and heavy cream together with a small plastic straw. Gunner took a seat in the chair next to him, stared out over the fields adjacent to the property. The air had gradually gotten cooler over the course of the day, evolving from a discomforting heat to an enjoyable coolness.
You know, Coop, I've been dreading having this conversation with you ever since you married that girl.
Gunner took a sip from his glass while Cooper kept his eyes locked on him in complete silence.
I don't mean this in a bad way. Every man in this town needs to have this conversation with their kid at some point. Some people don't mind it because they already know the answer, but others try to put up a fight in fear of the possible disapproval their kids have for their customs. They all know it results in their son or daughter disagreeing, so I can hardly blame the parents for fighting all this.
Gunner let out a heavy sigh before resting his drink on the porch railing.
I know that Andrew has no clue what goes on in this town, but do you have any hunch of how he'll respond when he finds out, Coop?
There was a moment of silence between the two men. Bugs chirped in the grass, and the faint crackle of a radio could be heard from somewhere in the house. Cooper swore he could make out the lyrics to The Man in Me by Bob Dylan through the static. They sat without saying a word. Gunner had his eyes locked on Cooper while he stared out over the land and thought for a moment. Now, to tell you the truth, Gunner, I have no idea how he's going to respond to all this. Tried taking him hunting, to test the waters. Shot a deer last winter. Was very hesitant when it came to gutting the thing, harvesting the meat. Cooper made an agitated sound before pinching the bridge of his nose. That's the only thing even remotely close to testing his feelings about all this. About what we've done. Honestly, I have no idea which way he's going to go about this. I'm just terrified that
we'll have to kill him.
Gunner let out with no emotion in his tone. Another awkward silence hung in the air as Cooper stuttered at the cold realization that he'd been so afraid to confront. Cooper stretched and reached for his glass resting on the porch railing. In one gulp, he finished off the drink and placed the glass back down on the weathered wood.
Yeah, it's never easy,
Gunner said while continuing to stare out of his property.
Some of the strongest men I come to know in this town cried like a baby when their kid was taken away. Never easy for me either. No. No matter how many times I do it, I don't think I'll ever get over the feeling of knowing that I'm the one responsible for killing someone's child.
Then why do we keep doing it? Gunner turned to look at Cooper. He was now sitting fully upright in his chair and staring at him with the most serious look plastered on his face that Gunner had ever seen.
Oh, son of a... You know the answer to that, Coop. Don't make me explain it.
Cooper sat in silence for a few seconds before grabbing his glass and retreating inside. He sloshed more liquor and heavy cream into the glass, hardly paying any attention to the proportions that he had been throwing together. As Cooper came back through the doorway, he stirred the light and dark liquids together with his finger before wiping it on his shirt. He took a large sip before falling back into the rocking chair. All right, let me rephrase the question. I know your reasoning as to what would happen if we didn't do it, but There must have been some incident that caused you to set this in motion. I find it hard to believe that you're doing this just as a precaution. Something did happen, or it got really close to happening. Gunnar smiled and looked over at Coop.
Sometimes I forget how smart you are, Coop. Now, there's a damn fine reason you're the only person I've ever abducted who's walked out of this house alive,
he said with a chuckle. Gunnar let out a heavy sigh and propped his feet up on the nearby end table.
It was probably about 12 years ago. A boy named Rodney. Just a year or two younger than Andrew now. They're able to get away with not sending our kids to school for a little while, but eventually, we knew that they'd need to get the proper education. Much to my father's liking, we let him go back to school. It took longer than my father had originally expected, but it was still only about 5 months before the incidents occurred. He was in a class. A few other kids from town. This one girl named Lily who sat next to him for the whole day. Grown up together, so it only makes sense. They were really good friends. Because of this, they confide in each other. One day, Lily went home, told her dad that Rodney wanted to go to the police, tell him everything that was going on in this little town. And that very night, her father came running in our front door and started banging on it. I was already in bed, but could hear from downstairs in our living room, explaining everything to my dad. Immediately after that, my father grabbed the shotgun hanging over the fireplace, nestled on the covers of my bed. Heard him slam the door to his truck, engine roared to life. As he peeled out of our driveway, my young mind raced, trying not to imagine what was going to happen next. The following day, Rodney wasn't in school. Wasn't there the next day either, or any other day after that. I made the assumption what had happened. Old man skirted the question whenever he asked. A year later, when my old man passed the tradition on to me, he fully explained what had happened that night. Pulled up to old Rodney's house, that shotgun slung over his shoulder. It was late at night, so his parents answered the door with a lot of confusion. Father told them not to interfere, simply pushed him away, walked upstairs. As Rodney's mother screamed and collapsed on the floor, my father dragged the boy downstairs, screaming, fighting the entire way. Gunnar paused for a moment. The void of silence was once again filled by the surrounding bugs and soft, blowing breeze. My father took Rodney outside, let him deep into the property, put a bullet in the back of his head. Cooper was sitting with his hands clasped together, holding his chin up. His gaze was now focused out over the farmland and the setting sun, beginning to disappear behind the horizon. Now, you were incorrect in your assumption, Coop. We don't just do this as some paranoid precaution. We do it because it almost happened. I don't want anything like that to ever happen again. Should anyone discover what goes on in this town, I don't want to be around to witness it. But it's the fallout of the members of our society would have. With any armed authority.
Have you ever considered just ending this altogether? Letting the generations that remember and participated in it just fade away with time? Gunnar chuckled and finished off his drink. He kicked his legs up on the patio railing and rocked himself in his chair.
Trust me, I considered it on more than a few occasions. Be a weight off my shoulders, but I don't trust some of the people in this town. There's a reason I'm the sole person who goes out and gets meat. For those who want it, I'm terrified that if I give up the whole thing, those who crave it bad enough would just defy my authority, try to get it themselves. Well, let's face it, not everyone is as smooth, clean, and tedious as I am. I'm terrified that someone would easily get caught and the whole town would be busted.
Off in the distance, Cooper could see Andrew and his mother returning from the stables. His stepson had found something which was now held in his hands, but Cooper was unable to make out what it was from a distance.
Now, I know it's not ideal,
Gunnar said in a somewhat defeated manner.
However, it's the best I can do with the situation my father put us in all those years ago. Personally, I never see an end to this. So the best thing we can do is just try control it the best of our abilities.
Two men sat in silence once again. Cooper ran through the multiple scenarios in his head, while Gunnar did his best not to let emotion cloud his judgment. If we end up having to go through with it, I want to be the one that does it. Gunnar raised an eyebrow and turned to give Cooper a surprised look.
You know, I've had parents offer to do the same for their kids in the past, but I never really expected that to come out of you. You sure you'd be up for it?
I killed my own father, didn't I? Cooper asked with a sense of pride as he recalled the night in vivid detail.
Yeah, but your father was someone that you despised. With every fiber of your being, that's a lot different than killing someone that you've come to know and love as your own son.
Cooper opened his mouth to respond, but he found he was unable to say anything.
Look, Coop, I'll give you until tomorrow afternoon to go through with all this. If you pull Andrew aside tomorrow, find out that you haven't asked him about it, then I'll have to do it myself. You and I both know that it would pain me deeply to do that to the poor kid, so for your sake and my sake, I want you to go through with this.
Cooper nodded, focused his gaze on the two members of his family as they drew closer to the farmhouse. Andrew came bolting across the yard with a large grin plastered on his face, clutched in his hand. Cooper could make out that he had the post of a wrought iron fence, a spike adorned the top, and rust dabbled numerous spots on its surface.
Well, looks like you found part of the fence that used to run around this property. That thing fell into disrepair before I was even born,
Gunnar said, while he reached into his pocket and retracted a pocket knife. With one swift motion, he flipped it over and scraped at some of the rust. An orange powder fell into the air, revealing the dark metal underneath.
Looks like most of the rust is only on the surface, so. How about after dinner, you and I go ahead and clean that thing off and get it treated?
Andrew nodded his head with excitement and rested the large length of metal against the doorframe. Susan opened the screen door and turned her head back as she stepped inside. Andrew, how about you come and help me fix dinner? Andrew heeded his mother's instruction and followed her inside. As the sound of shuffling pots and pans echoed through the screen door, Gunnar turned back to Cooper with a serious look on his face.
If I were you, I'd talk to him after dinner. Should worse come to worse, we have to take care of him. I personally think it'd be best if the last memories he had were of a night like this, surrounded by family.
Gunnar stood up from his chair, placed a hand on Cooper's shoulder.
Put a lot of faith in you, Coop. So. Please don't let me down.
With a final heavy sigh, Gunnar went inside to help prepare dinner. Cooper found himself sitting alone on the front porch. The sounds that were drifting outside from the kitchen were filtered out. All he could hear were the buzzing of cicadas and a slight breeze, wafting through the tall grass near the edge of the property. Just like the first time he'd ever been in this house. The sunset was casting an eerie orange glow over everything. What had once been a living nightmare when he woke up, strapped to a chair in Gunnar's living room, was now a place he considered to be his true home. He had come to love and accept Gunnar as a father figure, one that he never had growing up. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw faint movement. The door to the barn had been left open, causing it to rock slightly on its hinges as it caught in the breeze. A soft groan would escape the hinges, barely audible to Cooper over the distance. As he stared at the building he had dragged his father into, the smell of blood began to fill his nostrils, while the memories of that night came flooding back. He shook his head and jolted up from the rocking chair, not wanting to think about it anymore. He walked inside, just as dinner was being pulled from the oven. The four of them ate at the dining room table that had been adorned with the first flowers of spring. There were plenty of stories told and laughter to be had as night began to fall over the small Texas farmhouse. The entire time, Cooper's mind swarmed with the thoughts of what he was going to have to do later that night. However, he managed to keep his composure and put on a pleasant demeanor during all of it. After Susan had served dessert, Andrew helped clear the table and put all the dishes in the sink. After they had all been scrubbed and placed on the drying rack, the four of them sat in the living room and watched a movie on television. The clock above the mantel was just about to strike 10, when Cooper leaned over and whispered something in Andrew's ear. "Hey, would you mind coming outside, helping me with something?" Andrew didn't ask any questions, simply followed Cooper outside. As he opened the door, a symphony of the night filled their ears. The entire landscape had come to life with the sound of birds, insects, other nightlife that inhabited the surrounding land. Cooper stepped off the gravel driveway into the freshly cut grass, his boots leaving prints in his wake. The two men walked in the direction of the stables, guided by the faint shadows of vegetation in the moonlight. "What do you think of living in this town?" Cooper asked bluntly, not knowing how else to start the conversation. "I mean, it's not bad or anything. I'm just not a big fan of the isolation." Cooper continued to walk as he pondered how to continue the conversation. "Yeah, well, there's a reason that this town has remained isolated when many others have evolved, expanded over the years." "If there's a reason," a little smooth move there, Coop, he thought to himself. "I know." Cooper felt his heart skip a beat. He almost tripped in a shallow hole, causing him to stumble slightly before regaining his balance. Whatever you think the reason is, I guarantee you that it's not. I mean, it's not because the people of this town practice cannibalism." Cooper was now at a complete loss of words. He had ceased his stride, causing him to stand and completely stare at his stepson. Silence hung in the air around him, save for the sound of the surrounding wildlife. Although Cooper was tempted to say something immediately, his loss for words caused him to think over his next words carefully. "Damn. You're even smarter than I originally anticipated." Andrew did not respond to this. He stood motionless and stared at Cooper with unblinking eyes. "I guess, before we get too deep into this conversation, I have to know, how did you find out? Uncle Gunnar and I do our best to keep all this a secret from the kids." Andrew motioned his head to the side, signaling for Cooper to follow him as he began walking again. Deciding it was best not to question the sudden leadership role that his stepson had taken, Cooper followed. "Well, not every kid knows. Let me rephrase that. Some kids know, but not all of them believe it. The first time I heard these stories was in middle school. I was in a group of friends, and some of the older kids started trying to spook us with tales about how some members of the town would go about abducting people across the state, butchering them." As they continued to walk across the field, Cooper kept his gaze straight ahead. He didn't speak a word and simply listened to Andrew's explanation. "At the time, we didn't really think of it as anything more than some sick and twisted joke, or a somewhat pathetic attempt to spook us." "So, when did you find out that it actually was all real?" Andrew paused for a moment as he gathered his thoughts. "It was the day I spent the night at this kid's house for my birthday. We had been good friends for years, so his parents let me stay for dinner and spend the night after all the other kids had gone home. His mother made a roast that filled the entire house with an intoxicating aroma. At the time, I thought she had just splurged and spent a little bit of extra cash on a good pork roast from the butcher." Andrew sighed and stared up at the stars in the sky. It wasn't until we were all seated around the dining room table and his mother placed the still steaming pan down in the middle that something struck me as odd. Whatever meat this was, it certainly didn't look like any kind of roast I'd ever had before. When I asked what it was, his parents just stared at me for a moment. The mother didn't know how to respond, so the dad just asked me if I wanted to try a piece. Andrew ceased speaking, causing a silence to fill the space between them. So, what did you do? Cooper asked in a dry tone. I thought about all the rumors of people being abducted and butchered. I also thought about the instances where some kids would stop coming to school. It suddenly occurred to me in that moment that perhaps there was some truth to those stories. My mind suddenly began to fear what would happen if I acted out at the dinner table. So I did the only thing that was guaranteed to keep me safe. I took a big slab of it on my plate, and I ate every last bit. Cooper could hear Andrew swallow loudly. He assumed his stepson was having to swallow down vomit after reliving that memory. I don't really disagree with it. I guess the only thing I don't like is that innocent people are usually the ones abducted for all of this. I guess it'd be different if this was done with criminals or other degenerates of society. Cooper tuned out Andrew's voice immediately after the sentence ended. From deep within his mind, a consideration came back that he tried to keep tucked away. Deciding this was as good a time as any, he stopped in his tracks. Andrew did the same when the familiar crunch of vegetation under his stepfather's boots ceased. Follow me, Andrew. There's something I need you to see. Cooper turned on his heels and started back in the direction of the barn. Andrew followed close behind. During the walk over, both remained quiet and to themselves. When they finally reached the tall and looming shadows of the barn structure, Andrew ran back to the house and soon returned with the iron post clenched tightly in his grasp. Trust me, you won't need to defend yourself, Cooper said with a forced chuckle. But I guess, if it makes you feel more comfortable, go ahead. Bring it. Andrew stood in front of the large doors. One of them hung slightly ajar, causing the smell of old wood, motor oil, and decaying plants to come spilling out into the cool night air. It should go without saying, but I want to make sure that you understand the severity of what I'm about to show you. If you speak a word of this to anyone, I won't hesitate to put you down. I've come to think of you as my son, my own flesh and blood, as much as it would pain me. Don't think that there would be any resistance for me to put a bullet through your head, dude. Do I make myself clear? Andrew swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded his head. Cooper swung the door open fully and motioned for his stepson to follow inside. As Andrew stepped over the threshold, he placed the sleeve of his flannel shirt under his nose to avoid the growing severity of the smells inside. Cooper continued towards the back of the barn, where a rickety flight of stairs ascended into a loft. Before going up onto the first step, he grabbed the shotgun that was hanging from a hook on the wall. As the two men climbed up the stairs, the ancient wood groaned and squealed under their weight. When they finally reached the top, Cooper reached out and flicked the light switch that was mounted on the structural post, with the wires crudely stapled to the frame of the barn. To the right of the opening in the floor, where the stairs came up, Andrew could hear a light bulb crackle to life, and a sickly yellow glow filled the area in front of them. Cooper stepped into the loft and waited for Andrew to reach his side. Andrew could see that the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. Although it had been disturbed in some places, his eyes then focused on a set of chains. They were bolted to a large beam overhead. The links drooped down from the ceiling until about halfway between the beam and the floor, before curving out towards the back of the loft and disappearing into the shadows. Before Andrew was able to question what they were there for, Cooper lifted his boot and banged it loudly on the floor. "Wake up!" He screamed in a deep, booming voice that echoed throughout the building and sent a chill down Andrew's spine. There was a moment of silence before shuffling could be heard. The chains rattled slightly, causing a metallic clinking in the air. Andrew watched in horror as one hand with a chain shackled around the wrist stretched out from the shadows and crawled at the floorboards before it. Soon after, another one came forward with a matching chain shackle and caused the crackling of its joints to fill the air. Andrew found himself unable to move as the two arms extended into the light, heaving a body from the shadows. A head that was covered by greasy, disheveled hair emerged from the darkness. A mouth appeared from beneath matted locks of hair and opened as if to scream, but only a painful squeak escaped. Its head slowly turned from side to side, attempting to locate where the sound of Andrew's heavy breathing was coming from. The thing let out a raspy wheeze as its gaze locked directly on him. Andrew started to step back, but Cooper quickly grabbed his shoulder and halted his movement. "Brought someone to see you," he called out. This caused the creature to let out another pitiful attempt at speaking. Extending a hand further, it caused the chains above to rattle and echo through the building. "We're gonna step toward you. We don't want any trouble like last time, do we?" The head started to hang towards the ground. "I said, now do we?" Cooper slammed the heel of his boot harder onto the wood floor. The boom caused the creature to throw its hands around its head and bend down into the fetal position. "Stay close to me and listen to anything I say," Cooper said as he motioned for Andrew to follow him. Together, the two took slow and cautious steps towards the thing that was now huddled over in a ball on the floor. With each footstep that connected with the floor, Andrew could see its body tremble with fear. Now within the close distance, Andrew could tell this was not some starved creature, but a human being. "Dad, who is that?" Andrew asked as he stopped in front of the individual. Without speaking a word, Cooper used the barrel of his shotgun to put the greasy strands of clumped hair away from the person's face. In the dim light from overhead, Andrew stared down at the face that he had not seen in years. Although yellowed bandages were wrapped around his eyes, he was still able to recognize some facial features. He felt his limbs go numb and the iron post fell from his hand. It came down to the floor with a loud thud, causing the man that lay there in front of him to throw up his hands in self-defense. "Dad, I thought you..." "Your mother had to keep you from the truth for a reason." Andrew turned to Cooper, with tears starting to run down his cheeks. "Your daddy never died in a car crash like your mother always told you. She did that to spare you from the truth until she felt that you were ready to hear about it. She personally would have liked for you to stay oblivious to all this for a few more years, but I don't see a better time for you to know the truth than right now." Andrew continued to stare down at the malnourished and weathered figure of his biological father on the floor. The image in his mind of a once muscular and powerful figure were now replaced with those of the weakened person that lay before him. Why did you do this to him?" Andrew barely managed to choke out through heavy sobs. Cooper took a deep breath and prepared himself for the conversation he had dreaded would come. "I'd only known your mother for just a couple weeks when I first met your father. At first, he was respectful to me. I grew to respect him, however, things immediately started to reveal themselves one night when your mother pulled me aside. She told me about all the times that he would beat her. How she thought that I was the person that could finally help her escape the living hell that he had turned her life into." Andrew looked up from his father to look at Cooper. A dead expression was plastered across his face as he glared down at the man before him. That wasn't even the worst of it. She told me that he had just recently started to sexually abuse her. It was small things at first, but they eventually grew to be extremely dark, sinister. Got to the point where your mother would fake having late shifts at work so she could sleep in her car in the parking lot instead of going home to him. All that Andrew ever thought of his father over the years suddenly came crashing down around him. as he stared down at the monster that lay trembling at his feet. For the first time in his life, Andrew could feel an emotion towards his father that he never thought would come forth. Blistering anger. I told Gunnar about this in confidence one night when I was visiting. As badly as I wanted to tell the police about all this, we both know that would only lead to the possibility of them finding what goes on in this town. If we turned your father into the police, he could just as easily lead them back to what goes on here. Any sort of law enforcement in this town is extremely frowned upon, so we decided the only sensible thing to do was to take matters into our own hands. Cooper paused for a moment and sucked in a deep breath before continuing. Gunnar and I hopped into my truck and drove to your house one night when you were at a sleepover. As soon as we opened the doors, we walked into the front yard. We could hear your mother screaming from inside. We ran towards the front door. We could see your father pinning her onto the floor. Thankfully, he had left the door unlocked, so we burst in, took aim at him with our weapons, continually punching her in the stomach. And our sudden presence had hardly seemed to slow him down. As badly as I wanted to blow his head off right there and then, your mother was too close for me to guarantee that she wouldn't be hit as well. Gunnar ran up behind him before he had time to react and smacked him on the back of the head with the butt of his rifle. Cooper crouched down and used the barrel of his shotgun to remove even more hair from around the father's neck area. A grimy bandage, similar to the one around his eyes, was wrapped around his throat. Andrew had no exact estimate as to how long it had been on him, but he guessed it had been there a few years. We came to later find out that your mother had been pregnant. He didn't want another child. Decided to kill the baby himself in a drunken stupor. We didn't reach your mother soon enough. She miscarried a few days later. Your Uncle Gunnar and I decided that it would be too merciless to kill your father after that night. Instead, we decided to keep him alive, so he could spend the remainder of his days tortured by the consciousness of his action. He brushed the back of his hand against the man's cheek, causing him to flinch. Isn't that right, Mac? Cooper reached into his back pocket and retrieved a pocket knife. He slid the blade under the bandages, causing Marco to stiffen out of fear. With one swift motion, Cooper sliced off the bandages with a sickening tear. As it fell to the ground, Andrew stared at the darkened scar across his father's throat. Instead of gagging him, I came up with the idea of slicing off his vocal cords. He'll never speak again, but his breathing isn't troubled like it would be with a sock stuffed down his throat. Should something ever happen where the authorities find him, he'll never be able to say what occurred here. Cooper grabbed Mac's hair and lifted his face up towards Andrew. This caused another painful squeak to escape his throat. As Cooper placed the blade under the bandages around his eyes, Andrew already feared that he knew what was going to be underneath. Cooper sliced off the fabric, revealing his father's eyelids. Zigzagging stripes of black thread held them together, and Andrew could feel bile beginning to rise in the back of his throat. If he ever found a way to escape, we didn't want him to simply tear off a blindfold and find his way to the police. I also didn't want to completely remove his eyes and ruin the possibility of getting an infection and dying prematurely. So Gunnar kept him knocked out and stitched his eyelids closed. Although this was a crude method, it was extremely effective nonetheless. Andrew opened his mouth to speak, but found himself unable to utter a single word. The man who he had idolized for years and missed so dearly now sat as a broken man in front of him. A pathetic shell of the father that he had known and loved for many years. A few more tears fell down his cheeks as he struggled to swallow the lump in his throat. And I know this is a lot for you to take in right now, Andrew. No man should ever have to see his father in such a state like this, but I have to make it clear to you that not every bad action that goes on in this town is given to those who are undeserving. There are a lot of times when your Uncle Gunnar and I have disposed of some horrible people on this earth. I just hope that you understand this. Now when we go back into the house, I'm going to sit you down with your Uncle Gunnar and the three of us are going to have to talk about... Before Cooper was able to finish his sentence, Andrew picked up the wrought iron from the ground and swung it high over his head. The length of metal came crashing down on Max with a sickening crunch. Small droplets of blood scattered across the floor. A few of them spattered onto both their clothes. Another gasp escaped Max's throat, this one even louder than the previous. A crooked hand slowly lifted up in defense, only to be met with Andrew swinging the post with all of his might. Cooper could hear the bones within his hand crack and protrude through the surface of the skin. Mac immediately retracted the limb against his body. Before he was able to huddle up anymore, Andrew brought the metal down into his father's back. Cooper stumbled back and collapsed on the floor. Although no bones could be heard breaking this time, there was a sickening thump when it made contact. Andrew could hear his father sharply take in a breath, proceeding to violently heave and cough as blood dripped down the corner of his lips. Andrew let out another blood-curdling scream as he continued to bludgeon his father in various spots on the back and head. One blow in particular came with such immense force to the back of Mac's skull that the stitches over his eyes began to tear. An eye partially protruded from between the crusty skin and looked out upon the world. After years of being shielded and hidden away, the last thing Max saw was his own son, raising the iron post for one final blow. Andrew gritted his teeth and smashed the iron into his own father's head. All the fractures that had been created along his skull finally connected and caused it to cave in. Andrew could hear a stomach-churning squish as bone fragments were forced into the soft and now exposed tissue of his brain. With one final breath, Mac dropped onto his head and into the puddle of blood that formed beneath him. The once shaking figure was now motionless. Andrew could feel his chest heaving as he took deep breaths. Cooper stared at the body in complete awe of his position on the floor. He had expected Andrew to have a few choice words for his father, but never anticipated the situation to escalate to this severity. Cooper wiped the blood that had spattered on his face with the back of his sleeve, then looked up at Andrew. Although Cooper had been spared from the majority of the bloodshed, Andrew's clothes were heavily doused in the dark crimson fluid. The flannel shirt and jeans would have to be burned later to dispose of any evidence, and possibly the shoes that were now slowly being soaked in the blood puddle that crept towards his feet. Andrew. Why? Cooper was unable to form a complete sentence. He continued to stumble over his words while glancing at his stepson, the blood on his face reflected in the sickly yellow light overhead. Andrew continued to stare down at his father's lifeless body as his breathing finally returned to normal. With a loud clang that echoed through the barn, the wrought iron post fell to the ground. Part of it landed in the blood puddle, causing some droplets to fly into Cooper's shoes. We'll take care of this later, Andrew said, without any sort of remorse or victory in his tone. Andrew bent down and pulled at Mac's hand. There was a sickening crunch as Cooper heard the bones in his fingers crack. Something was now clamped to Andrew's fist, but Cooper was unable to make out what it was. With one final glare at the mangled corpse before him, Andrew slyly turned on his heels and walked towards the stairs. He passed Cooper, staring into his stepson's eyes. The joy and innocence that had once filled them had left, and now replaced with a cold emptiness. Cooper stood to his feet and quietly followed Andrew back to the ground floor. As they turned towards the open doors and passed under the loft, Cooper felt blood seep through the floorboards and fall into his hair. The small puddles that were forming on the ground squelched under his boots, as the man could once again hear the bugs outside. Stepping out into the coolness of the night, Andrew pointed his head towards the heavens and sucked in a deep breath. His eyelids fluttered shut as he slowly let the air out between his lips. Cooper stepped up next to him. Although hesitant at first, he slowly reached out and placed a hand on Andrew's shoulders. He didn't immediately react, but slowly turned to face Cooper. The emptiness still lingered in his eyes, but a glimmer of happiness caused the corner of his lips to slightly pull into a smile. "You all right there, Andrew?" Cooper asked in a soft tone. Andrew let out a light chuckle and stared off at the farmhouse in the distance. Gunnar and Susan suddenly stood up from the rocking chairs. She bolted down the front doors and sprinted in their direction, with Gunnar following behind at a walking pace. "I'm fine, Dad." "Perfectly fine." Cooper felt the wind suck from his lungs at that moment. Andrew had never called him Dad before, and expected that day to not come for a long time. Andrew turned and gave Cooper a warm smile before wrapping his arms around him. Taken by complete surprise, Cooper slowly lifted his arms and returned the embrace. "You make me proud to call you my son," Cooper let out through tears. "And I'm proud to call you my dad," Andrew said, just before Susan reached them. "I could see the blood all over your white shirt from the porch, Coop. What the hell happened?" She froze in place as Andrew turned to reveal the dark spots scattered all over his clothes. Susan clasped a hand over her mouth. "Jesus Christ, Andrew, what the hell did you do?" She struggled to hold back tears when her hands began to tremble. "Mac's gone now," Andrew let out under his breath. Susan gave me a confused look before shaking her head from side to side. "No, baby, your dad's been gone for a long. Andrew stepped forward and grabbed one of her arms. He placed his hand over hers and gripped it tightly. Blood ran down his wrist, slowly cascading over Susan's skin. The still warm fluids almost caused her to pull back. "I know the truth now, Mom. He's finally gone, though." Andrew pulled his hand away from Susan, looked down at what her son had left in the palm of her hand. Sitting in a small pool of blood was Mac's wedding band. Tears began to stream down Susan's cheeks as she held the tarnished gold ring between two fingers. Unable to speak, she threw her arms around Andrew and held him tightly. The wrought iron slipped from Andrew's fingers once more and fell into the grass to his side. His arms wrapped around his mother as she sobbed into his shoulder. Cooper watched from the side as Gunnar finally reached the group. He walked up to Cooper and examined the bloodstains on his shirt. For the first time since his own father had been killed, Cooper saw a look of bewilderment on Gunnar's face. The man looked up at the barn, then back to Cooper. Without having to even ask the question, the men exchanged glances and a smile. Andrew let go of his mother and slowly turned to Cooper. With blood still speckled on his face, he smiled. "Come on, Dad. Weather's perfect for a bonfire. I know Uncle Gunnar's been meaning to burn off some trash for a while." With a pat on the back, Cooper wrapped his arms around Andrew's shoulders, and the two men started back towards the farmhouse. The moon now hung in the center of the sky, bathing the land in an eerie blue tint. Gunnar retrieved the wrought iron post from the ground. He and Susan followed them. As they walked, she sniffled. Gunnar placed an arm over her shoulder. Susan smiled and wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. As they returned to the farmhouse, the iron post dripped blood the entire way. Small, dark splotches littered the grass in their wake. The doors to the barn swung slightly in the breeze, causing a haunting groan to echo into the night. We thought my brother overdosed. He didn't. By Andrew Nunez. "It'd be easier on everyone if you just died, Jimmy," was the last thing I ever said to my brother as I slammed the door to his apartment behind me. The words echoed in my head in a constant loop, drowning out our friends and family offering their condolences to my parents as I sat beside his open casket. I couldn't stand to look at him. Half out of guilt. The remainder his appearance. Drugs took his life, but it robbed him of his looks long before that. Death had not redeemed him of his quality. It amplified it. "Alan, please," he said with an outstretched hand, beckoning me to sit beside him on his dingy couch. "Don't leave." The lump in his throat is audible as the welling of his eyes were visible. Despite his pleading, I just left him there. I should have done something. I could have done something. Instead, I told my own brother he should die. And either he or God or both agreed with me. Because later that night he did. We didn't know exactly what substance it was that he was abusing that did it. We were still watching on the toxicology report for that. People will tell you it's not my fault. People will insist that I love my brother. People will say that I'm a good man. People are wrong. This is my fault. I own it. I abandoned my own flesh and blood in frustration when he needed me most. Hours passed before my conscience finally got the better of me that night. And by the time I made it back to his home to make amends, it was too late. I stood at his entrance, practicing my apology, testing the best sentences I could use to tell him how sorry I was in the same breath. Truly get through to him that his demons were tearing our family apart. My rehearsals were interrupted by a squishing sound from beneath my feet as I paced. The industrial carpet lining the corridors of the rundown complex were wet. The dirty beige color now a dark brown in an uneven half circle where it had been saturated most of the foot of my brother's door. I apprehensively used my spare key to gain entrance. Cool droplets of water fell down from the ceiling, puddles pooled deep in sections on the uneven floors. My guilt morphed into anger instantly as I wondered how much my parents would have to pay the landlord for the damages my little brother had caused to his property. It builds into blind rage as I jerk in surprise as one of the drops from the ceiling falls onto my face. The emotion fades faster than it came when I turn my body towards Jimmy's living room, preparing to give him hell. My voice catches in my throat when my gaze finds its destination. Very sad. Lifeless on the sofa where I left him, his mouth agape, eyes wide, nearly completely white. His soaking wet t-shirt molded to his skinny body, revealing the contour of his ribcage. His hand outstretched at his sides, resting on the unoccupied cushion as if even in death he requested my companionship. "Jimmy?" I shouted as I scrambled towards him, splashing the puddles as I ran. I held him in my arms, screaming his name and tapping his cold face with my hand. "Please, Jimmy, wake up!" My voice cracked in terror. I recoil in surprise as a drop lands on my hand, breaking my daydream as I sat slumped in the funeral home's chair. I instinctively look at the ceiling as if I were still at Jimmy's apartment, realizing too late that I was the source. I've been silently crying this whole time. The rest of the viewing was as hard as you would expect for a family bidding a 26-year-old member farewell. The burial was even worse. There's something about the finality of the closing coffin that leaves you so empty. You'd swear a piece of you was in there with your loved one, never to see the light of day again. I wish I could tell you that it became easier on us in the weeks that followed, but I won't lie to you. I can't find it in me to care enough for that. It's been especially hard on my mother in the 6 weeks that have passed. She'd spent most of it watching old home videos of my brother as a child, birthday parties, piano recitals, graduations, and the like. Her nights, however, are filled with quiet weeping from her upstairs bedroom, clutching a photo of him in a frame she keeps by her bedside. My father, being the war veteran that he is, copes with trauma, as he always has, with quiet strength, a cigarette, and a stiff upper lip, and if need be, a stiffer drink. I've never seen so much as a tear form in my father's eye in my entire life, not even as we carried my brother's casket to be buried. You could sense his sadness as it hung heavy in the air around him. Its weight could be felt by every single person in attendance, but to him, crying was weakness. Weakness in a man, and not an option, while he had a wife and a surviving son depending on him. It's the reason why I was so shocked to see him sitting on the floor next to his cell phone, sobbing like a child when I let myself into their home. "Dad?" I said as I made my way toward him, leaving the front door open behind me. I knelt as fast as I could to rest my hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong?" He wiped his face shamedly. "Alan," he said, trying his best to conceal the agony in his voice, and shifts his body up abruptly to stand. I keep him down. He doesn't resist. "Dad, it's okay." "What happened?" Fresh tears well in his eyes as he stares into mine. It's my turn to be strong for him, as I fight back tears of my own. "The doctor called," he whispers. "All of Jimmy's tests came back negative." "What?" I blurt, failing to conceal my surprise. "There were no drugs in his system. Hair, blood, saliva, nothing." "What killed my boy?" I felt dizzy at this revelation and used my father's shoulder to steady myself as I sit with my back to the wall beside him. Both of us staring off into nothing, both of us now weeping. We had all been so sure that Jimmy overdosed that we had refused an autopsy, confident that sending off Jimmy's various bodily fluids would reveal the culprit. The police found no evidence of foul play, and they attributed the water and damage to the apartment as a drug-fueled hallucination. "He probably thought the place was on fire." The exact words used by the officer. Yet here we are in a reality where Jimmy not only did not overdose, but had no trace of narcotics in his system whatsoever. More time had passed since I found my father on the floor, and its passage had done nothing to heal my wounds. I became obsessed with my brother's death and vowed to find out what it is that killed him, not only for my sake, but for the sake of my parents, who had deteriorated into shells of their former selves without their closure. I found my answer among his possessions, which lay in storage boxes in my parents' garage. Jimmy was an avid reader. He owned more books than an underfunded public library, so it was easy for everyone involved who didn't know him to overlook the leather-bound journal that was tucked away beneath Wilde and Poe. Even if it had garnered any amount of attention, it would have been short-lived. Its pages were seemingly empty. When we were children, we nicknamed my father the Colonel because he took all his military-style boot camp training and transitioned it into his parenting. When one of us broke something in the house, or just generally disobeyed him, we'd be sent to our rooms, which he called the hole, for a preset amount of time. "Come here, boys," he would bellow, his deep voice reverberating throughout the house, and my brother and I would drop anything we were doing and scurry to get to him as fast as our little legs would carry us. We would stand up straight before him with our hands at our sides, like mini soldiers. "Which one of you boys broke your mother's vase?" he'd say to us sternly. My mother, cooking in the background, tried hard not to smile. My father never hit us, so the little soldier routine, as he called it, made her smile through his mock grimace every time. "I did, sir," Jimmy would shout. "Takes a man to own up to his mistakes," my father would say. "But he's got to face the consequences too, don't you think?" "Yes, sir," he'd say, standing up straighter. "Good. 1 hour in the hole," the Colonel replied, with my mother behind him smiling blatantly, now hoping to at least suppress the giggles. It wasn't uncommon for Jimmy to take the fall. It's just who he was. Would always be. I had broken the vase that evening, but Jimmy couldn't bear the thought of someone else being punished. At least if he had the power to prevent it. He gave anything and everything he had to those he loved. And as he aged, that quality only grew stronger. Jimmy was a better man than me. It was during those hours in the hole that we devised a way to communicate with each other, undetected from the Colonel's watchful eye. We'd pass notes under the door written in lemon juice or milk. Once dry, the paper would be clear, the ink unseen. The only way to reveal the message was to apply heat, either with a candle or the burning hot incandescent light bulb of our bedside lamps, turning the transparent ink brown like magic. As soon as the message was read, the paper was destroyed, and if it was ever intercepted before the heating process, as they sometimes were, our parents would simply command us to pick up after ourselves, seeing only a blank page. It was our very own invisible ink. We briefly tried with urine once, but neither one of us was willing to touch the paper afterward, which defeated the purpose. Holding Jimmy's leather journal in my hand and leafing through its pages, I smiled at the memory. I took it with me to my father's workbench in the corner of the garage. Reaching to take the propane torch from the top shelf, I twisted the nozzle, releasing a hiss of propellant, and pulled the trigger, igniting a blue flame. He couldn't have. Could he? I traveled the flame carefully over the first page as to not combust it, and stare in bewilderment as words do indeed begin to surface. Let me go, Alan. Burn the book. Love, Jimmy. With my heart beating out of my chest, I don't know whether to laugh or cry as I read Jimmy's message from beyond the grave, so I do a bit of both as I swallow hard, composing myself before turning the page. I pray that no one is reading this. I've done my best to contain what I've found, so when I die, it dies with me. What the hell's going on, Jimmy? I whisper aloud. For the very first time, the thought of the toxicology report might have been mistaken. For the very first time, the thought that the toxicology report might have been mistaken emerges in my mind. Who else but a man intoxicated could ever write such things? The sense of smell is so closely linked to memory that the aroma created by the flame emanating from the paper triggers happy flashbacks of when we used to do this as children. A stunning contrast to the morbidness of my discovery. How did we end up here? Another page. Another message. Please. If anyone is reading this, especially you, Alan, who is the only one who knows about the invisible writing, just burn the book. Please do not bring the poem back into this world. Poem, I think to myself as chills run down my spine. I love you, Alan. To the moon and back. If you're reading this, hug Mom and the Colonel. They'll need you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I couldn't risk it. I discovered a curse. A curse that once read binds you to it. It won't let me die, Alan. Unless I write it. I flip the page as fast as I can to continue my brother's message. It can't be stopped. I've tried. I've destroyed everything related to the curse that I've found so that it can't be sought out. The invisible writing is my loophole, a way to end my suffering, but protect the next victims. The next 15 pages consist of only 3 words, repeated over and over. Do not read. My heart breaks at my brother's mental state. If I had known his mind was so fragmented, I could have gotten him the help he clearly needed. The words on the 16th page burned darker than the rest. No longer the golden brown of its predecessors, but a deep black. No longer bold capital letters, but a fine script. Each flash of lightning will reveal its form. It preys on the cursed in the eye of the storm. Every page that followed was empty. I clutched the journal to my chest. So sorry, Jimmy. I love you too. I couldn't bring myself to tell my parents about my discovery. It'd do them no good. Upon exiting the garage, I tucked the book into my jacket sleeve and lay it on the couch, where I took a seat next to my mother watching her daily dose of home videos. Hey, sweetie, she smiled, leaning to kiss my cheek. How you doing, Mom? I'm all right, I guess. Just trying to remember happier times. Videos just remind me that I did tell you boys I loved you a million times a day. She points to the screen. I chuckle because she speaks the truth. At this moment in the video labeled Jimmy's 8th birthday, she can be heard from behind the camera asking her 2 sons her favorite questions. Boys, how much does Mommy love you? Jimmy and I sat on the backyard picnic bench surrounded by presents and other children, red as tomatoes and rolling our eyes. Mom, not in front of our friends! We hushed in embarrassment. How much, my little monkeys? She squealed with glee. To the moon and back, we muttered in defeat. To add to our horror, the other children surrounding us were oohing and awing in unison. See? My mother says, drawing my attention away from the television and back to her. Both of us share a laugh. It's so nice to see my mother smile again. It helped me forget Jimmy's journal. So when she asked if I would like to see another video, I agreed without hesitation. Do you have my clown birthday party? I inquired. Oh, I sure do, she says, jumping up from the couch to retrieve it. It's my favorite. I remember that damn party like it happened yesterday. Party from hell, Jimmy would dub it later on. My mother thought that it would be a tremendous idea to have a clown perform at my 9th birthday. Completely unaware that clowns terrified both my brother and I. It was a particularly hot July day. We had already been delirious from too much sun and sugar when Twirly the Clown made his entrance holding my candle-topped cake, dancing instead of walking toward us with the grand exaggerated kicks of his legs. There's a particularly funny scene in this video where my mother pans the camera from Twirly's theatrics and laughing family members in the background to where my brother and I sat holding each other, eyes shut tightly, with our faces turned towards the sky, crying in fear. But that's not what played on the TV. The setting hadn't changed. The people in attendance were the same. My younger father, before his chair began to gray, stood at the barbecue flipping burgers, just as I remembered, only he was dripping wet in the rain. It wasn't raining, I think to myself, confused. Look at how handsome your father is, I hear my mother say at my side. I can't find my voice to reply, so I just nod, never taking my eyes off of what I'm watching. Oh, here's the best part, she claps with joy. Bring on the clown, my father says. But it's difficult to make it out over the ever-increasing ferocity of the storm. The screen goes white with a flash of lightning as if it struck within meters of where we were standing. My pulse quickens as I perceive everything in near slow motion. The camera moves from my father to Twirly the Clown, his large red shoes splashing in the mud as he danced, the white makeup on his face running down into his orange-colored jumpsuit, the large red painted smile associated with clowns sagged into a grimace, his eyes completely blacked out as his drawn-on eyebrows did the same. The happy family members in the background clapped and cheered as the water pooled around their ankles. Heavy winds tossed the women's hair this way and that as they applauded, seemingly unaware of the hurricane that raged around them. Lightning illuminated the scene that had made my family laugh for the better part of 2 decades. I stare in horror. Paralyzed with fear, the camera finally finds its way to young Jimmy as we sit holding each other. However, this time only one of us was crying, with our eyes shut. Jimmy was staring directly at the camera, wide-eyed, head vigorously shaking from side to side. His lips move, but I can't make out what he's saying over the ripping thunder. Another flash of lightning, and I gasp as a figure materializes behind us out of nothing. Its skin is stretched tight around its tall, skinny body, almost translucent in appearance. Its oversized hands resting on both of our shoulders, its long fingers traveling almost the entire length of our torsos. I can't make out its face through no fault of my own because it doesn't have one to speak of, only a mouth that makes the whole bottom portion of its oval head. Jimmy jerks his shoulders away from its clutches, running up to the camera and grabbing it with both hands and bringing it up to his face. "You let it out," he shrieks. "Alan, you let it out!" He repeats himself until his voice is hoarse. The hands of the figure come into frame behind him where they rest on his shoulders. I taste the salt of my tears at the corner of my mouth, and I recoil violently as I feel a hand on my shoulders. "It's all right, Alan," my mother's voice says with both of her hands held out in front of her, trying to soothe me as best as possible. "I'm sorry, Mom," I respond as I start wiping my face with my sleeves until I turn back towards the video. The sun is shining, the clown is dry, his makeup impeccable as the young me reluctantly blows out the candle. "I miss him too," she says, rubbing my back. "I gotta go." It is all I could muster in my dazed condition as I kissed her cheek, picked up my jacket, and headed for my car. I sat in silence on my drive home. Silent enough that the soft swishing of my windshield wipers in the rain was infuriatingly loud. I kept going over what had just happened in my head. Overwhelmed, I switched on the radio to the most mindless dance music station that I could think of to drown out my thoughts. The vapid radio disc jockey addressing his audience in the typical fashion. "Yo, yo, yo, party people," he began. "This is MC Mookie Mays, the flyest DJ on the East Coast, coming at you live on this beautiful Saturday evening." He has the desired effect of distracting me at the very least because I roll my eyes and mutter "douchebag" under my breath. "There's not a cloud in the sky today," he continues, "so I want to see all you beautiful people dancing to my lit beats under the stars tonight." I laugh out loud. "Hey, DJ Dimwit, it's raining." My voice trails off as I pull off to the side of the road. I reach to the passenger seat to retrieve my phone. I open to my weather app. Warm and clear skies with a 0% chance of precipitation. My blood runs cold as thunder rolls in the distance. I look up from my phone to see the silhouette of a figure far in the distance, and all I can do is stare as each flash of lightning transports him closer to me. I floor the gas pedal and speed down the road, my tires spinning on the slick surface, my wipers struggling to keep up with the ever-falling rain, making it difficult to see. I gotta get out of here, I speak to myself to try to calm my nerves, constantly checking my rearview mirror in hopes to catch a glimpse of the figure behind me, but I was mistaken when another flash of light brought the figure directly in front of my car. I swerved to avoid it, losing control of my vehicle, spinning out as I try to compensate the steering. When it's finally grinding to a halt, I sat, gasping for air and listening to my wipers squeaking as they pass over the dry glass. I exit my vehicle and I notice the stars in the sky. Not a cloud in sight. When I got to my apartment, I headed straight to my bathroom to splash some cold water onto my face. What greeted me in the mirror caused me to stare. I've begun to age, just as Jimmy had. My cheeks are sullen, the dark rings under my eyes are the worst I've ever seen. At first, I questioned my sanity. After all, the apparitions left no evidence of their visits. When the storm passed, I was able to carry on my day. Even my appearance would be reasoned away with illness or depression caused by the loss of my brother. That luxury would be short-lived. As its bond with me grew stronger, its effects became more apparent. Each passing storm would leave its mark. The wet clothes on my body, the welts in the shape of the handprints underneath them. It's been weeks since my first exposure, and I can't carry on like this anymore. I hope you can understand. I don't want to die. The figure comes with a higher frequency than ever before. I awaken in the middle of the night to thunder, and my apartment is now rife with mold from water damage. I've lost 30 pounds and 2 teeth since then. It's here with me now, both hands resting on my shoulders as I write this. I try to hold off for as long as I could, but I'm gonna give in for what it wants. The largest audience it's ever had, and who knows how many centuries that it's roamed the earth. I think in passing it to you, I can save myself. I can't be sure, but it's worth a try. Jimmy was selfless. He wrote the curse in a way that nobody could ever read it. He gave his life to protect the world, and please forgive me. I've already told you. Jimmy was a better man than me. I have trouble sleeping at night. No, I don't have insomnia or sleep apnea or any kind of sleeping disorder. Let's start from the beginning. I graduated from university a year ago with a degree in business administration. I found myself a decent apartment near my first job. The job paid fairly well, and so I was able to afford relatively nice furniture for my apartment. Despite all my brand new furniture and linens, after the first few weeks in my apartment, I started to feel small, ticklish sensations running up and down my legs in bed. Once I paid a bit more attention to them, I realized that it must have been bed bugs. But I was disgusted, and so I decided to sleep on my couch and do some research on how to get rid of them in the morning. I read online that the best way to get rid of bed bugs is to clean all the sheets in your apartment and then scrub and vacuum the mattress and bed frame. When I got home from work, I spent hours going through each of these steps, making sure to do everything thoroughly to get rid of the insects. But thankfully, it seemed to work, as for the next month I had no insects scuttling along my body at night. However, as I was lying in bed about 5 weeks after I had scoured my bed clean, I felt something run across my hand. "Stupid bugs," I muttered, as I angrily got out of bed and went off to the couch for the second time. In the morning, I called my pest control company, and they came and fumigated my bedroom. The bugs never stopped coming back. Over the better part of a year, I kept trying different things to get the bugs to leave for good. I called 3 different pest control companies, bought a new bed and linens, and even moved to a different apartment without bringing any of my old furniture with me. But no matter what I did, they always came back with time. As one might imagine, I've had nightmares involving these bugs. They were nightmares where I would wake up and I would be absolutely covered in bugs from head to toe. They were all different sizes and shapes and numbers of little legs. I was never able to move in any of these dreams, and the bugs, they would inevitably make their way into my eyes and mouth, with there being nothing I could do about it. There were other dreams where I would be running through the jungle, trying to get away from other unknown creatures behind me. I would end up colliding with multiple spiderwebs and feeling huge tarantulas and other insects working their way up my legs and back as I ran. However, the most prevalent nightmare that I had was more hellish. It would always start with me slowly waking up on a hard stone floor. I'd open my eyes and be met with a very large and cavernous space, lit by many small fires, scattered across the cavern's rocky outcropping. Looking down, I saw my body, or what remained of it. My arms and legs were mostly eaten away, with just scraps of skin, tendon, and bone left of them. The rest of my body was heavily decomposed, with my chest torn open in several places. There were bugs crawling all over my ruined body. They ran up and down the bones of my legs and arms, and flowed freely in and out of the gaping wounds in my chest. Terrified, I would attempt to brush them away, get up, and flee. However, my mutilated body always failed me. And after several minutes of struggle, I would resign myself to lying there against the rocky outcropping behind me. I always woke up right after I closed my eyes in defeat, and without fail, I would need to brush several bugs off of me when I awoke. However, everything, including these dreams, started to change a few weeks ago. Over the past year, during the periods where I had bug problems, I only ever felt 2 or 3 at a time. However, one recent night I woke up from one of my bug-induced nightmares and I felt dozens of bugs all over my body. I jumped out of bed attempting to brush them off my skin as quickly as I could. I turned on the light to see how bad the infestation had gotten, and I froze. There wasn't a single bug in sight. Come to think of it, I'd never actually seen any of the bugs I'd been dealing with in the past. It hadn't come to my attention before because there was only a couple, and I assumed they just crawled away once I turned on the light. But as I stood there that night, there was something about having so many bugs crawling over me and then looking to see my bed completely free of vermin that made me break out in a cold sweat that I hadn't felt before. Was I going crazy? I couldn't be. I had been feeling bugs in my bed for almost a year, and neither I nor my family had ever had any serious mental problems before. I went off to sleep on the couch that night, but something told me to not make any calls to my extermination companies. And it just kept getting worse from there. Every night I went to sleep, I would wake up with hundreds of bugs covering my skin, and every night when I turned on the light, there were no bugs to be seen. The dreams began to escalate as well. When I woke up in the hellish cavern, devoid of any natural light, I would not escape back to the real world so easily. It would often feel like I would be lying there, suffering in my ravaged and decaying body for hours, even days. I was no longer alone in the cavern either. Looking around at the rocky terrain covered in fire and insects, I saw the remains of several other unfortunate souls, all of which were almost completely eaten away. However, each of these bodies had an intact, perfect head. When I had my first incredibly long dream in the cavern, I sat against the rock wall that I woke up against for what must have been 2 days or more. Within that time, I had somehow almost gotten used to the insectant crawling over my body. And I grew restless. I wanted to do something, anything at all, and so I decided I would try to talk. When I tried to speak at first, I broke out in a coughing fit due to the extreme dryness in my throat. When I finally stopped coughing, I felt a change in the atmosphere in the cavern. The best way I can describe it is like when you let out a sneeze or a cough while sitting in a quiet auditorium. Nobody says anything about it, but you can almost feel their eyes on you, looking to see who disturbed the quiet of the place. Despite this feeling, I decided to call out to one of the bodies that was lying on the ground. "Hey, Bonesy over there. Yeah, you. How's it going?" May have sounded like a super childish way to talk, but I was sure that I was the only living being in that place, and it felt silly to talk as if I was talking to a real person. All my fake joviality quickly turned into fear as I continued to look at the body. Its head incredibly slowly turned to face me. It was at that moment when I realized these bodies, these things, were still alive. I would have screamed in terror, but I saw the look of true pain that resided behind those large, tear-filled green eyes. This skeleton, this This woman had been down here for God knows how long, and all she could do was lie there in silence as bugs crawled all over what used to be her body. We gazed at each other for what felt like an eternity. And then I awoke in my bed, crying my eyes out and covered in hundreds of bugs that I could not see. I wish with all my heart that I could say that that was the end of it. That I had just had a long string of really bad nightmares, a very strange pest problem. But it wasn't the end. I had the same dream every night. And every night it feels like my stay in that place grows a few hours longer. I swear when I wake up I'm covered in thousands of bugs now, and every time I get out of bed they still vanish completely. Starting to deteriorate physically too. I stopped going to work a week ago and I can barely function. Despite the eternity I feel lying in that cavern every night, I only seem to get an hour or two of sleep. And all I see of my right foot now is a mangled and bloody bone. I now know that I'm being drawn into this hell covered in bugs and bodies of the damned each night. Each night now is getting longer by the week, and it's only a matter of time before I join the other lonely, abandoned bodies in the cave. I have to come to grips with the reality that the other mutilated people that I see every night are real people, just like me, eaten away by the bugs, left to rot while still cursed to live, with nothing they can do but cry. So I have one question to ask. Before I'm lost to the bugs forever. Do you feel them crawling? When going to Las Vegas, ride the rides from places like New York, and the Stratosphere, gamble away your money in a drunken state on a handful of poker chips, or take a complete stranger back to your expensive hotel room. Perhaps you prefer a magic show, Cirque du Soleil, David Copperfield. I'd suggest this option for you on your first night in Sin City. Real magic is to be found in Vegas, but not on the Strip, no. For a true experience that will make you believe in the realm of magic, you have to seek out master illusionist Mephisto Centurion. To see his astounding performance, drive off the Las Vegas Strip past the airport. Keep going until you reach the desert. But be sure you make this journey after midnight. Mephisto's act is only to entertain the nightlife. Once it seems like you made a wrong turn, stop your car, get out, peer across the night desert. You won't see anything at first, but then a hotel shrouded in darkness will catch your eye. Leave your vehicle and approach the hotel in the distance. You'll notice that no lights are on in this hotel. Don't be fooled. It's plenty occupied. Walk up to the hotel's entrance, knock on the glass doors, and they'll swing open. The entire lobby will be dark and no one will be there to greet you, but bring a flashlight as you enter the building and make your way through a large, empty casino. Following the signs hanging from the ceiling that will direct you to the hotel's theater. While there'll be no one around, if you get the sense that you're being watched, you're correct. However, don't let that feeling hold you back. Continue to follow the signs until you come to two large golden doors with many faces sculpted on them. These doors will open for you, and to your surprise, you'll find an enormous, bright theater filled with hundreds of people you didn't even know were there. It'll be a full house, but one seat will still be available in the front row. Take it. It's yours. Once you're seated, the lights will dim, the curtains will open, and the great Mephisto Centurion will appear in a flash on stage. Dressed entirely in black with a cape, a top hat, and a long black beard and mustache. He'll have a wide variety of tricks up his sleeve that will astonish you. So try not to blink. The beginning part of his act typically consists of card tricks, like making a card float in the air right out of the deck, or making a card appear on the other side of the room. Something even more mind-boggling is when he takes a real sword and impales himself right through the stomach. This special trick isn't even performed inside a box. It looks like the sword is actually going through his body, and he'll pull it straight out, and he'll be just fine. He can also make real animals and automobiles disappear and reappear at his command. His talents are endless. Fire will accompany many of his acts. You'll find yourself cheering and applauding with amazement, but in the back of your mind, you'll be thinking that nothing you saw actually happened in real life. Once this thought crosses your mind, Mephisto will ask for a volunteer and point directly at you. He tells the audience that he'll make you disappear. Now, how could you resist such an honor to be a part of this legendary act? A spotlight will shine upon you. The whole audience will join in applause to give you encouragement. Stand up, get on stage, where the real experience will begin. You may have seen disappearing acts before. You'll probably think that a trapdoor will open before Mephisto's assistant will help you get back to your seat while everyone claps for you. But instead, you feel the most intense rush of your life. Mephisto, at nearly 7 feet tall, will loom over you and inform the crowd that the trick is about to begin. He'll have you tell everyone your name and what you do for a living. Then he'll have you stand atop a platform and wave his hand at you while chanting words of ancient languages. And at a certain point during his speech, you'll notice his eyes glowing an eerie purple. And before you can scream, a beam of white light will engulf you. After the light comes the darkness. But it only lasts a few moments before you're flying through a wormhole at a rate beyond your control. It'll be quite a thrill, so don't close your eyes. When you reach the end of the wormhole, the next thing you know, you'll be soaring high in the air above the stratosphere, and an invisible force will keep you there. The feeling of the wind will make you realize this isn't a dream. Don't be afraid to swoop down over the Las Vegas Strip that glows in the night. Enjoy the flying sensation. Don't even question it. Just have fun while you can, because it won't be going on for too long. Before you know it, you'll be teleported inside a lion's habitat at the Mirage. A lion will wake up, it'll approach you, and you'll run for your life, frantically, searching for an exit that will not be there. The ferocious beast will eventually have you cornered and ease in for the kill, and in fear you'll curl into a ball, you'll shut your eyes, and you'll prepare for the end. When you open your eyes, you'll be in a dark room with a wide opening at the top. You'll realize all too quickly that you're standing inside the Mirage's volcano. The show is about to start. You'll scream loudly in hopes that someone will rescue you, but it'll be too late. A ball of fire will come for you. There'll be no way to escape it. Just seconds before your impending doom, there'll be another flash. You'll be back at your seat, sweating, trembling, as you suddenly hear clapping from everyone in the theater. Mephisto knows your journey was intense, but he was there with you the entire time to guide you along your way. He welcomes you back, he thanks you, then he bids the crowd farewell and vanishes. Converse with the crowd if you wish, and make your way back to the dark lobby. As soon as you exit the hotel, there'll be another flash, it'll be morning, and you'll be in your own hotel room with no memory of how you got there. And that's when the realization comes that the magic trick isn't over, and it never will be. Don't bother looking for this place in the daytime, because you won't find it. If you look up Mephisto Centurion online, all that exists will be a single article titled Vegas Hotel Burns, Illusionist Goes Missing. This article was written in 1960, only a few days before the famous El Rancho Hotel burned down, which was by far a bigger story. The hotel was called the Las Vegas Illusion, and Mephisto's act was the main attraction. Little did the audience that attended know their entertainer was completely out of his mind. He committed arson that night, burning the whole place down with the intent of taking himself with it. Many guests fled, but some did not make it out alive, and their remains were never found. Mephisto, whose real name was Albert Torrance, worshipped an ancient god who promised that he would give him great power if he sacrificed his body, and he would do it in the most dramatic way possible, with one show. Now his abilities you can't possibly comprehend. He'll be entertaining you for all eternity. You can ask for help from the people around you. They won't hear you, because you died the second you got out of your car. Stepped into a dark abyss that consumed you. There's never a hotel. There's never an audience. There's only him and his beloved act. And how do I know this? Well, I invite you to the show of a lifetime. And I promise, my dear apprentice, will make it all worthwhile. They told me you were experienced in harsh waters, James said, as he pointed out of the pearls of sweat that had formed on my forehead. Yeah, I do, I said, moments before hurling the remnants of a less than appetizing lunch off the side of our ship. Just you look a bit green around the gills, he continued with a smirk. We just met a few hours ago. I'd been airlifted on the USS Orion, a sea lift handling abyssal transport capsules for a classified project conducted by the United States Navy. I guess they forgot to mention that I'm much better underwater in submarines, I shot back. Considering the circumstances, his casual demeanor left an uncomfortable atmosphere amongst the workers. They all knew what my visit entailed, but just like myself, they were scant with information. All I knew was there might be a contagious infection at the bottom of the ocean, and my job was to either disprove it or to confine the entire crew aboard the station. As soon as we were positioned securely on top of the Tonga Trench, we were rushed into the transport capsule, a minuscule vertical submarine designed simply to take us to the base on the ocean floor, 20,000 feet below us. Talos. I entered the sub feeling excited, while also dreading the return to the deep blue. It had been 10 years since serving as a hospital corpsman, one of the few actually stationed aboard a submarine. Over the years, I had clearly lost the natural sense that I once had for the ocean, yet I longed desperately for it. "Whenever you're ready, Doc," one of the crew members said, impatiently waiting for us to drop into the abyss. I raised my thumb. "As ready as I'll ever be. Go ahead." 10 feet. The Twilight Zone. The impact with the ocean lightly shook the capsule. As we submerged, my nausea quickly diminished, and a sense of peace washed over me. I was back. Outside the window, a few curious fish accompanied our journey downward. Various sea life attracted by the cargo ship following to see us off. James piloted the miniature sub, having done the trip 1,000 times before. It wasn't anything new to him. Myself, I'd never been below 2,000 feet, and never had I been able to look through the window and admire the most unexplored blue world. 3,300 feet. Midnight Zone. As we sank deeper towards the abyss, the last stray rays of sunshine vanished. We had left the realm of sunshine and mankind, all in favor of the domain of darkness. "First time in the abyss, right?" James asked after a long bout of silence. "Yeah. Served aboard a submarine for a few years, but they never go this deep. This is something else." He smiled at me. "Well, you're in for a treat then. We're going all the way down. Talos sits right at the edge of the trench. Ain't nothing quite like it." Any sea life once curious about our sub had long since retreated towards brighter areas. The rapidly increasing pressure had proven hostile to most, but some resilient little creatures had found a way to thrive in places once thought to be lifeless. Miracles of the ocean. Within an hour, we had reached a depth of 10,000 feet. Beyond the 15-inch glass pane separating us from certain death, lied nothing but everlasting darkness. For all we knew, the two of us could have been all that existed in the void, if not for the sound of the outer hull settling under the pressure, a constant reminder about the vastness of the ocean. To distract myself from the unsettling creaking sound, I asked James about the only thing I could think about. "Hey, why don't you tell me more about what happened down there?" James acted casual that far, but my question quickly changed his nonchalant expression to a frown. "They briefed you on the surface, didn't they?" "Of course, but, and that'll have to do," he said firmly. 13,100 feet. The Abyssal Zone. The world outside hypnotized me. Staring so far into nothing, knowing there could be a full world only a couple of feet before you was bizarre. I'd never experienced true darkness until that day, and to think a good portion of Earth's life had existed within it for millions of years terrified me. When I served aboard the USS We told stories about shipmates going crazy after years at sea, that the isolation or distance from the mainland never bothered any of them. He firmly believed that staring into the ocean and pondering its secrets was what truly drove men from their sanity. And to combat this, they never put windows on their vessels. Though it was clearly a tale he made up, seeing what truly lies beyond the surface brought back these memories. Maybe he was right after all. My sinister thoughts were interrupted by a dim light appearing in the distance, a red dot dancing blissfully up and down, getting closer to our little sub. It was a jellyfish. Look at that, James says as he pointed at the little creature, so fragile yet defying the deep-sea pressure. Another light joined it. Then a few more, and before long a symphony of pulsating crimson lights formed around our capsule, welcoming us with the warmth of thousands of stars, making up their own little galaxy thousands of feet below the surface. It was the most magnificent thing I'd ever seen. A bloom of jellyfish happily existing in such hostile conditions. Couldn't help but feel impressed. They're called Atolla jellyfish, James stated. They don't usually venture this far down, but there's something about this place that seems to attract them. Usually see a few on my journey down here, but never anything like this. I just nodded in response, too mesmerized by the sight to notice what he said. But as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished, once more leaving us in absolute darkness. Hey listen, Doc, I'm sorry about that outburst earlier, James said. I turned toward him, turning my back to the darkness for the first time. It made me feel vulnerable. You gotta understand, this ain't something we usually deal with. And Mike, well, I've known him most of my life. I know how much this sucks, believe me. Just trying to get as much information as possible, for all our sakes, I said. Yeah, well, there's nothing I could tell you anyway. Airlock's been on lockdown for the past 2 days, and we've been under strict orders not to open it until you deem it safe to do so. I didn't ask any further questions. I dealt with contagions ever since leaving the army, and 90% of the time, they were simple overreactions. 19,700 feet. The ocean basin. For the first time since we left the ship, the radio came to life, emitting a static sound, one that slowly took the shape of a man's voice. James, can you hear me? Loud and clear, Captain. Got our man from the CDC as well. We're about ready to dock. Great. The crew's getting impatient. Radio started to break up. That damn radio's dock station A. Welcome to the Abyssal Zone, James said. Radio's been acting strange lately. Imagine giving us a state-of-the-art station, but comms from last millennium. Through the window, we could see a massive dome, lit by hundreds of lights. 3 paths stretching from its center, each lit up by different colors, making sectors A, B, and C. There was something else lit up by the station's light. First, just obscured figures leaving shadows in the sand, but as we got closer, I realized they were fish. Hundreds, if not thousands, of dead sea creatures, littering the ocean bed, their corpses mangled from the intense pressure. Christ. The hell's up with the fish? I asked. Same as the Atolli. Something attracts them down here. They swim until their bodies break under the pressure, then they sink. What could possibly do that? There are a few theories, but from what we can tell, it's a sound that we periodically hear from the trench. The docking process in itself took quite some time. The outer hull had changed ever so slightly due to the high pressure, just enough so that fitting into the station proved a challenge. As the doors finally opened, I stumbled outside the capsule, greeted by 3 of the crew members aboard. Hey, you're the doctor, right? The oldest of them asked. That's correct, I said as he reached out his hand to introduce himself. Name's Robert Lewis, the captain aboard the Talos, he said as he shook my hand. Thank you for coming this far. I know it's not the most pleasant journey. He seemed polite enough, though clearly sleep-deprived, with bloodshot eyes and greasy hair. This is Jennifer Burke, one of our biologists. That's Henry Gale, our technician. They both shook my hand, neither making eye contact as they did. Hey, Captain, where's Abby? James asked. Still at Sector B. She's not doing too well, as I'm sure you can understand, he responded. James nodded. Let's talk, Robert said as he gestured for me to follow. The hallways were narrow, dimly lit up with lights that flickered and constant creaking emitted from the walls. It looked disproportionate considering how large it had all seemed from the outside. As a rather tall guy, I had to crouch down to keep my head from knocking into the ceiling.
"Sorry about the grim mood," Robert said. "It's the first time we've been dealing with something like this. I'm assuming they told you about the situation on the surface?"
They did, but I have to admit I'm a bit fuzzy on the details.
"As are we. Mike put himself in lockdown as soon as he returned to the station. We haven't had clearance to open it yet."
Mike, he didn't give any good reasons?" I asked.
"Never got the chance. Fell over dead the second we hit the button."
Robert led us into the central dome. In contrast to the hallways, it was a pleasant surprise. A large living space filled with furniture and personal effects. Had I not known better, I could have believed that we were still on the surface.
"Mike discovered some microorganisms down in the trench. New type of parasite, he said. He claimed they were able to withstand any amount of pressure, which isn't a surprise down here. He also explained that they were completely unaffected by the rapid change in environment,"
Robert said as he headed inside an office. Did he believe it was contagious?
Seeing as he was our microbiologist, I can't really come up with any other fathomable conclusion. Needless to say, we destroyed any samples, but we still don't know why he put himself into lockdown.
Robert sighed.
"That's not the strangest thing."
I waited patiently for him to continue.
"We lost him down in the trench for 3 entire days. Tracking system failed, comms went down. Did whatever we could do, but it was futile. Even if we had found him, he only had enough oxygen for 10 hours, so unfortunately, we presumed he had died. Then out of nowhere, his tracker reappeared on our systems, showing he was moving back up the Tonga elevator, and though he never responded to any of our attempts at contacting him, he was clearly alive."
"How?"
"It's impossible. That it happened. Once we let him in the station, he simply locked it down and fell over dead on the ground."
Before Robert could continue, the technician walked into the office. "When you examine him, be careful not to damage the EPM suit. It's hardly the time, Henry," Robert commanded, glaring at him. "I'm just saying, this is a $1 billion project."
"Why don't you get the equipment out for our doctor here?"
Robert demanded, getting more agitated by the minute. "Look, Captain, if you would just let me go to the airlock, I could take all necessary precautions."
"Absolutely not. Do you think headquarters would have sent down the damn CDC if they thought we could handle it? For Christ's sake, Henry, know your limits."
The technician left and quickly returned with a modified hazmat suit and some surgical supplies. We moved on towards Section B. Unlike the hallways we had traversed before, these were large and well lit up. As we arrived at the airlock, we found Abby standing before the glass doors, staring longingly at Mike's lifeless body.
"Abby,"
Robert said. I know it's time," she responded as she turned around. "Oh, you're the doctor?" she asked, her eyes red and voice trembling. I nodded. "You'll figure out what did this to him, won't you? I don't understand."
"Abby, why don't you come with me while they work?" Robert said. "You don't need to see this."
As Robert led her back to the central dome, Henry started unpacking the cart of medical supplies, including isolation drapes and a hazmat suit. "All right, I'm going to guide you through this. No need to mess up a perfectly good EPM suit," Henry said. What does EPM mean, anyway? "Exoskeletal pressure modulator," Henry said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. James and Jennifer helped me seal the hazmat suit, while Henry hung up the isolation drapes. I stepped through while Jennifer entered a code behind me to unlock the airlock. My ears popped as they sealed the door shut behind me. Both the drapes and airlock were translucent, meaning they could observe everything I did. In addition to a mounted camera on my shoulder for closer view, displayed on a monitor on the other side. Just by the control panel, Mike lay dead, wearing a massive black suit, looking more like a robotic piece of machinery than diver's gear. There were several cables and hooks hanging from the ceiling, and just turning him over was a massive task, as he weighed about half a ton wearing the suit. His face was pale as a sheet, with thin streaks of blood pouring from every available orifice. The eyes were red from conjunctival bleeding, completely ridding them from any white. "I'm ready," I said. "All right. First thing you'll need to do is to simply inspect the suit. Look for any breaches in the integrity. It shouldn't be possible, but in the unlikely event that something broke through, a self-healing mesh should have formed, like a kind of a gray." I looked over every inch of his suit from top to bottom. "There! His feet!" Henry yelled. Sure enough, there was a patch of gray that stood out from the matte black metal covering the rest of him. "Something actually perforated his suit," Henry said, surprised. I got closer, giving them a better look in the monitor. "Clearly, the puncture wasn't what killed him, though," he added. I had to agree with that assessment. Any breach not sealed off within a nanosecond would immediately crush him, but it seemed that the mesh had replaced whatever penetrated the suit at the same time as it was removed. "Now attach the cable to his shoulder. They're color-coded, so it should be easy enough." I attached the cables as instructed, which caused the suit to lighten up and start unhinging. The front of the suit opened up, revealing Mike's completely mangled body. "What the hell?" James asked. "That's not pressure damage," Henry responded. Mike's ribs were broken outward, though they had not torn apart his flesh. His chest seemed to have expanded to almost twice its normal size. I continued to remove the helmet, pulling it off his head. I looked into his eyes for a brief moment, baffled at what could have crushed his internal organs to essentially explode. For the briefest of moments, it seemed like his eyes moved to meet my gaze. "Did you just see that?" I asked. No one said a word. We all just stared at Mike, waiting for something to happen. His eyes moved again, darting in random directions as he started gargling violently, contracting his chest. "Oh God, is he still alive?" Jennifer asked. He opened his mouth, letting thousands of massive worms pour out into the floor. They immediately crawled in every direction, up the walls, onto the ceiling, desperately searching for a way out. Mike continued to spew out more slimy worms. His mouth tore open in the process, leaving his jaw completely unhinged before falling off. Once all the worms seemed to have evacuated his corpse, his chest tore open, revealing even larger worms. It quickly became apparent that all of his organs had been consumed, replaced with the disgusting creatures. Some of them started clinging to my suit as I swatted at them in panic. None of the others knew what to do. They could only stare at me, flailing around. As the worms touched each other, their flesh temporarily fused, forming longer versions of themselves, growing in size and then breaking off again. They wrapped around my arms and legs. I begged for someone to help me, but they couldn't do anything. "Hang in there," Henry yelled as he fumbled with the panel for the airlock. Within seconds, a few small taps emerged from the ceiling, spewing what I could only assume was liquid nitrogen. Whatever it was, the worms froze in place, freezing to the point that I could break them into tiny pieces. It only took a moment, but all the worms had been killed off. And though my suit had partially protected me from the cold, I collapsed, exhausted, and shivering onto the ground. "Get me the fuck out of here!" I demanded, knowing full well they couldn't do that until I had dealt with the infestation. Robert had just returned to see what the commotion was about, and upon seeing what remained of Mike lying torn into pieces on the ground, he stopped in his tracks. After a minute of catching my breath, I got some sense back. With some morbid sense of humor and functioning on autopilot, I turned towards Henry. "Sorry, but the suit isn't going to be salvaged. We're ejecting the whole fucking airlock as soon as I get out of here." Henry turned to Robert, pleading for him to make me reconsider despite what we had all just witnessed, but Robert took my side. After removing the recording unit from the EPM suit, I packed the entire thing into an easily ejectable container, while making sure that no worms remained in my suit. All I took was a small sample of a frozen worm, packed into a vacuum container. I exited the airlock and handed the sample over to Jennifer. She had prepared the previous parasites brought back with Mike, and I told her to get everything ready so I could determine what we were dealing with. Robert started the procedure of ejecting the airlock content, including what remained of Mike and the EPM suit. Henry pouted the entire time. James hadn't moved an inch since the event. He turned sickly pale, as if he just realized the severity of the situation. We have to tell him, Captain, he said quietly after a few minutes. Tell me what? I asked while getting out of the hazmat suit. Robert took a deep breath, mulling over his option.
Yeah, you're right.
Tell me what? I repeated.
The real reason why we're stationed down here.
Death can be a beautiful thing. Beyond all the stigma associated around the event, it's the beginning of a world that starts directly from the end of another. When a whale dies, in extreme depths, they sink towards the ocean floor, where entire ecosystems arise from their decomposing bodies. This is called a whale fall. Mike's EPM suit had left behind 3 days' worth of footage. Henry was put on the task of preparing it for viewing. While we couldn't save him, nor the suit, we could at least figure out how Mike died. As we waited, the captain decided it was time for me to learn the truth about their mission, and why no one on the surface had ever heard about the scientific wonder that was Talos.
You see, you saw all the dead sea creatures littering the floor around the station?
Robert asked. I recalled the hundreds of mangled fish bodies, not the most welcoming sight to the abyss. James told me there was something that compelled them to dive down here, some kind of sound. Robert nodded, and he pulled up a computer. After a moment of fumbling, he clicked on a sound file.
About 5 years ago, we recorded this coming from the depths of the Tango Trench.
It was an oddly synthetic sound. Like a whale's mating call had been pitched down and jumbled around. And in the midst of all of it, there was something that sounded like a whisper.
They recorded something similar around the Mariana Trench. It's called the biotwang.
Sound played on loop as we talked. Oddly eerie for something so innocent.
We first thought it came from a whale. It's a bit distorted after traveling vast distances or instrumental interference. Then we saw how it affected the wildlife in the region. Blooms of jellyfish appeared out of nowhere, fish defying all instincts to dive towards crushing pressure.
What made the sound then? I asked. Robert pulled up some pictures on the screen. Creatures similar to roundworms, but pitch black. They looked nothing like what I had just witnessed in the airlock, however.
From what we can tell, they're, thus far completely undiscovered ecosystem somewhere down in the trench. Isolated for millions of years, unaffected by mass extinction events. They've evolved quite differently from life we see on the surface. It's like millions of single-cell organisms working together to form more complex creatures. Unlike ourselves, the cells can detach and rejoin at will. We've named it the Syncytium.
That's what killed Mike?
Well, they could be a part of it. What we just saw in the airlock is far more dangerous than the microorganisms we gathered here.
Before we could continue, James interrupted, letting us know the footage was ready to be viewed.
If they ever decide to declassify the existence of the station, they'll never mention the creatures, nor the sound that alerted us to their presence. Sure, one day, they'll hail this all as a supreme technological advancement. The truth be told, the reason why the Navy put billions and billions of dollars into this project, so that humanity could traverse the ocean floor, is simply because they want to find whatever's making that sound. Find a way of using it.
Cap, they're waiting for us, James said. We gathered in the central area. Abby sat in the back, some distance away from everyone else. She seemed even worse for wear than before, frail as if she'd lost weight in the past couple of hours since meeting her. Henry controlled the footage, ready to speed through the important bits as the descent itself was quite slow. 20,000 feet. The Hattel Zone. Everything we saw would be from Mike's point of view. The footage started at the airlock, Abby standing before him with a concerned expression on her face.
Hey, don't worry. I'll be back before you know it.
Not like it's my first time in the depths. Not like we'd waste $1 billion on me dying anyway. She didn't seem consoled by his words. This time's different. We haven't tested the suit beyond 30,000 feet. Nah, but we tested pressure. The suit should be able to go much further before, breaking. Henry forwarded the footage. Mike stood directly at the edge of the Tonga Trench. To his left, a platform extended even further down towards the Hattel Zone. An elevator sat at the platform's center. A short distance down the trench, he saw endlessly long tendrils, gently swaying with the current. They belonged to the body of a malformed creature, looking like it couldn't possibly control its long appendages, yet it seemed unfazed by the depths. Guys, you seeing this? He said excitedly as he pointed at the bizarre thing. It's a Magnapena squid! He almost jogged along the edge to get a better view, the suit audibly exhausted by the effort. Don't put too much strain on the suit, Henry interjected over the radio. It'll be fine! What else did they pay for? As he got closer to the squid, another popped up behind it, one with even longer appendages. Oh, damn. I never thought I'd see one up so close. Stop messing around and get on the elevator, Henry demanded. Fine. Let's not enjoy our job, then, Mike responded. He boarded the elevator and strapped himself in. The journey would take him another 15,000 feet into the abyss. It was a loud, sturdy piece of machinery able to withstand the immense pressure of the dreaded Hattel Zone. Mike himself would control the speed of the descent, only handing over control to Henry should something happen. Not long after the descent started, Mike stalled the elevator. Hey, suit's making a weird noise, he said. That's normal. It's adjusting to the pressure change. We told you it would happen the deeper you go. Yeah, I know, but... You'll be fine. 27,000 feet. Once more, Mike stopped the elevator, directing his gaze at the edge sticking out from the cliffside. On it lay the corpse of a bow-headed whale, almost half a planet away from its natural habitat. The whale had been partially hollowed out, riddled with deep sea eels and tiny eyeless fish, an entire ecosystem thriving from its death. How'd that whale get here? It died like all the other creatures down here. Yeah, but it's a bowhead. At least I think it is. Don't they live around the Arctic? Just continue the descent. 35,433 feet. Horizon deep. The elevator reached the bottom of the trench after about an hour, allowing Mike to finally unbuckle himself from his seat. He grabbed a box of beacons to allow the next person to easier navigate the area. After stepping off the platform and getting away from its bright lights, it became abundantly clear that the bottom of the ocean was far from empty, and that the entire bed was covered in previously undiscovered life. Millions of fungal-like plants covered the floor, and transparent fat shrimp swimming between, apparently feeding off them. On the cliff wall itself, thousands of bioluminescent plants extended, just a stalk with a blue bulb, bending in the direction of Mike's movements. It was hauntingly beautiful, looking as alien as anything from another planet. He continued along the cliffside, putting down a beacon every 100 feet or so. I expected this place to be horrible, Mike said. You know, being named after the god of the underworld and all. No one responded to his comment. Guys, you still hear me, right? Yes, Mike, we can hear you, Henry said. We're here to work, not make stupid quips. Has anyone ever told you how much better life can be if you at least try to enjoy it? Henry, stop being such a killjoy. You're making history down here. Henry didn't respond. How about you hand Abby the radio? Hell, I'd rather listen to the captain ramble about protocol going on and... Mike stopped dead in his tracks. Reaching the end of the cliff before him was a steep fall, leading down into an endless chasm of darkness. Henry, are you sure the elevator took me all the way to the bottom of the trench? He asked as he stared into the abyss. Yeah, you're 35,000 feet. Well, it's just that, it's just that I'm standing at the edge of the cliff, and, this is clearly not the bottom of the ocean. That's impossible. We surveyed the entire area with sonar. Well, I'm telling you, The ground beneath Mike crumbled to pieces. He slid off the edge of the cliff and dove further into the deep. The darkness now surrounding him was absolute. Nothing could possibly help him orient himself as he fell. To fall in the ocean was a much slower process, giving him time to think what kind of fate awaited him as he sunk to the depths, never before known by mankind. He called out for his crew members while desperately clawing at the cliff, but even with the suit, he was unable to slow his descent. As he got deeper, the suit started emitting a loud beep, alarms to alert to rapid pressure changes exceeding 16,000 psi, but before he could even react, he hit the ground hard. Mike fell silent, passed out from the impact. Unknown depths. The void. Minutes after landing in unknown depths, Mike awoke to the sound of his suit beeping. The suit had held its ground and was starting to adjust to the new pressure. The manometer was broken, and with his tracking device malfunctioning, we could only try to guess how far he'd fallen. Mike grunted as he got to his feet, taking some time to figure out what had happened. "Henry, you there?" he finally said. No response. "Captain! Anyone?" Apart from a few malfunctioning instruments, most of the suit seemed intact. No contact could be made with the base. Everything past that point would be after the comms went down. We all patiently awaited to learn of Mike's fate. Despite having fallen far beyond what we believed to be the ocean floor, he had just landed on another plateau, with an endless distance still progressing downward. The abyss was ever present, taunting us with its emptiness. "Please respond," he begged. Defeated. He activated the beacon still attached to him and checked his surroundings. He had landed directly in front of a cave leading inside the cliff wall and moving steeply upwards. While protocol strictly dictated to wait for rescue in these situations, we could hear gargled sound emitting from the cave. Whatever it was, it compelled Mike to check out the cave. The walls inside were perfectly smooth, an impossible formation of rocks reflecting the bright light shining from the EPM suit, lighting up the cave as far as it stretched. Mike stared at the shining walls for a moment, adjusting the light. They had seemed smooth at an angle, but when light was pointed directly at them, it uncovered bizarre patterns, like symbols, not corresponding to any known language. While he studied the symbols, a loud sound shook through the cave, almost sweeping Mike off his feet. It sounded similar to the biotwang, but with slight differences. The rhythm was changed. It seemed to put Mike further into a trance, and he diligently followed the source, ignoring any chance of rescue the further he went. The cave led to a much larger cavern, extending beyond the reach of any light source that he had available. Unlike the tunnels, these walls weren't smooth, but were covered in millions of tiny holes, each perfectly round, each identical to the last. Upon closer inspection, the holes weren't empty, but filled with worms, just like the ones we'd seen spew out of his body inside the airlock. They wriggled and reached out for Mike as he walked through the cave, pulled toward the sound in the distance, getting louder with each passing step. The deeper he got, the less he seemed distracted by the holes, which were growing in size along with the worms. Mike's only hypnotic objective was to reach the sound. On top of the worms, spindly, long-legged creatures walked across. They looked like shell-less spider crabs, dipping their limbs into the worms, merging temporarily while seeming to feed them. For each dip into the holes, their limbs grew shorter, while the worms expanded. Eventually, he reached a corner of the cave, and with it, the source of the sound. It was a half-consumed whale calf attached to the wall, bound by hundreds of massive worms extending into its torn flesh. Despite being half-eaten and broken beyond any chance at life, it somehow didn't succumb, as if the worms themselves kept it alive, involuntarily life-supporting it, repurposed for their own needs. The calf gaped open its half-eaten jaw, so mangled, Mike could see straight into its vocal cords, which were also covered in the worms, tugging and moving them into position. The whale screamed, emitting another jumbled sound that pulled Mike ever closer. While Mike was distracted, several worms had emerged from their holes, rapidly swarming around him. Within seconds, they had joined together, wrapping around his legs and climbing up the suit. It temporarily brought Mike back to sanity as he tried to tear the worms off, but they were far faster than him, trapped inside a slow metal box. He stumbled to the ground, allowing more worms and their spindles to cover each of his limbs. The creatures merged together, forming a sheet of flesh that soon covered the entirety of his body. Mike fell silent, and the camera showed nothing but a flesh-colored mass, muffling any audio, save for Mike's panicked breaths. He screamed as a loud bang almost broke the speakers. The sound of his suit being perforated in the mesh, refilling the hole we'd found on the sole of his feet. The creatures had gotten inside his suit, digging into his flesh, Mike crying in agony before falling silent. We all stood speechless in front of the monitor now, displaying nothing but a timer, proving the camera was still running. Abby had left, with James following to console her.
"That can't be it,"
Robert said. "Let me fast forward," Henry said, half whispering in shock. We forwarded through almost 3 days of nothing while the worms incubated inside Mike, trapped alone in a cavern no one knew was there. The camera started clearing up, the flesh sheet peeling off as the view showed that Mike had returned to the elevator. During the 3 days down in the trench, the Syncatium had occupied, covering it with their fleshy appendages. Mike was controlling it, or whatever remained of him, inside the suit. He wandered towards the station, flakes of syncatial flesh falling off him for each step. His crew called out to him over the radio now that they could reach him, but Mike could do nothing but gargle as worms had consumed most of his lungs. At the airlock, he stumbled inside, ready to unleash hell within the station, but for a brief moment, Mike managed to halt himself. Perhaps the thought of hurting those he loved was enough for him to temporarily gain control, just enough to shut down the airlock, putting himself into lockdown. Mike collapsed on the ground. He had died days ago, but his will remained even as he turned into nothing more than a vessel for the horrors he now carried within him. The footage ended. We stood in silence for a moment, none of us daring to speak a word about Mike's cause of death. I hardly believed it, despite having almost fallen victim to the same fate.
"Henry, call headquarters. Tell them we're shutting this project down," Robert said, breaking the silence. "Jennifer, destroy the sample from the airlock. It's still sealed, right?"
Jennifer nodded before heading towards the lab.
"We need to make sure that whatever this is stays in the abyss."
I joined Henry as he attempted to call headquarters. The radio returned nothing more than jumbled static. Robert was checking all the security feeds, sending out drones to scavenge for the Syncatium at the elevator.
"Captain, the comms are down. Can't get any signal."
On the security feed, we saw the flesh of the Syncatium had stretched along the ground, covering some of the corpses of fish that littered the ocean floor. It was impossibly large, using the elevator and platform as a scaffold for climbing up towards the station. A loud metallic clang sounded through the station, followed by an alarm. "The hell was that?" I asked. "Hull breach, Sector C," an automated voice said.
"Isolate it!" Robert demanded.
"What about just do it?" Henry frantically tried to navigate the security system, attempting to get an idea as to the extent of the damage. "What's in Sector C?" I asked.
"It's the lab. Fucking hell, I hope Jennifer didn't get there yet."
All the station sealed, trapping anyone inside. Another loud bang shook us. The alarm sounded again. "Hull breach, Sector B."
Fuck, what now?"
Henry asked. Robert stood in shock, frozen by the decision of saving the station or fleeing.
"We have to evacuate,"
was all he could say. Most of my old crew, after leaving the Navy, struggled to get over their longing for the ocean. Such was the case for my submarine captain, Louis Johnson. He always claimed the sea would be his final resting place, where he truly belonged. And following his honorable discharge, he went straight into hyperbaric pipeline welding. It's a dangerous job, where the only enemy is invisible, always stalking each dive, each new mission. A foe that can't be sensed, but with the ability to destroy everything you're in a split second. Pressure. Maybe I'm cursed, unable to live on land with my own people, but at least I'll die where I belong, he had said. Johnson would be lucky enough to forever be united with his one true love at a sight of a burst pipe. One that took him away. Finally making him one with the deep blue sea. It's funny how the brain operates as everything around you is falling to pieces, far beyond your own control. Once there is nothing left you can do, the mind turns into a place of safety, fond memories from a time long since past. For me, those memories belong to my time of service, to my old captain and crew. It wasn't an easy time, but it was filled with purpose, with my problems solely confined to the ocean. When Robert yelled at me to get my ass in gear, I finally snapped back to reality. "Doc, come on, we gotta get out of here," he yelled. James returned to the central dome alongside Abby. They had heard the alarms, but hadn't the faintest idea about what had occurred. "Get to Section A. There's still 2 transport capsules. Get number 05 ready for departure and wait for me," Robert said. "Cap, what are you gonna do?" James asked. "Jennifer's in lockdown. I'm getting her out." "What if the creatures got inside?" Abby asked. Robert thought for a moment before handing her a walkie. "If you don't hear from me in 15, just leave." The station shook as another hole was torn through one of the sections. My ears popped from the shockwave. "I'm coming with you," James said. "You're not facing them alone." "No. We need you to pilot the transport capsule. If you get hurt, we're stuck down here." Wasn't a valid excuse. They all knew fully well that the submarine was easy enough for any of the crew members to maneuver, but Robert refused to risk any more lives and would use whatever reason he could come up with. "Cap, please. It's an order. Get out of here now." They hesitantly agreed and started leaving. "I'll join you then. I know nothing about the station or the sub, but I can at least assist you should something happen," I said, knowing he couldn't come up with any excuse to stop me. He reluctantly agreed, and together we headed for the labs in Section C, worrying that Jennifer might be trapped behind the airlock. Or worse. Drowning is a horrible way to die. Once you realize there's no way to reach the surface, that you're trapped in a cold, dark tomb, your throat simply closes up. No matter how hard you try to inhale, your body simply refuses, even as the agonizing pain of running out of air overpowers your natural instinct to breathe. You simply refuse to give in to the overwhelming desire. It isn't until the body starts shutting down and the corners of your vision start to darken that you reach the breaking point, and your brain decides to pull something in, regardless of air is present or not. Suddenly, ice-cold water flows in through your throat, unstoppably filling your lungs. So desperate for air. It's a clumsy, painful way to go. And by the time water has filled each avulus, most are still conscious, with just enough time to regret their decision to ever enter the ocean. I thought it funny, as we ran toward the airlock, that at least we wouldn't drown. Surely the worms would consume us, or the pressure from a collapsing station would instantly crush us. "How did the hull get breached anyway?" I asked as we got closer. "It's supposed to be impossible, but I'm sure it's those fucking monsters," Robert said. The alarm had stopped alerting us about the hull breach and was now recommending a station-wide evacuation. "Warning. Hull integrity severely compromised. All crew report to designated docking stations," it said. "How much time do we have?" "Not enough." As we turned the corner at Section C, we saw Jennifer sitting against the wall on the wrong side of the airlock. It took a moment to realize the horrors of her situation. We saw her legs fused with the flesh of the Syncytium. They had started eating away at her lower body, digging their way through her flesh and rapidly replacing her organs with their own meat. Despite it all, she remained conscious. "Jen!" Robert said. the only word he could muster from the shock of what lay in front of our eyes. She slowly turned her head towards us with her eyes red from the hemorrhaging, as worms had consumed her insides. "Captain, is that you?" she said, weakly, blind from blood filling the inside of her eyes.
I'm here, Jen."
"I guess the sample wasn't dead after all," she joked, the hoarse voice as she coughed up what could only be a mixture of blood and lung tissue. "Maybe tell the doc to double-check these things in the future."
"He's here with me now,"
Robert explained.
"So sorry, Jen.
I know. There's nothing left to do. I guess this is just it." She coughed up, violently spewing out pieces of her lung and worms. "Don't worry, Captain. It's not your fault that a monster from the abyss crawled its way up to destroy..." Her voice cracked. I looked over at Robert. He looked horrified, but couldn't take his eyes off her. "It really hurts. Please, eject this section. I just want it to be over." Robert nodded, forgetting that she couldn't see him. I went over to the control panel. It was fairly easy to use, especially after having witnessed Henry mess with it before. All I needed was the passcode. I thought it wouldn't be right to let Robert essentially execute her himself. "I'll do it," I assured them. "Rob," Jennifer said.
"Yes?"
"Don't let these fuckers get to the surface. Promise me that much."
"I promise."
Her abdomen started bulging out. She screamed in pain as the worm started tearing open her stomach. "Captain, the code?" I asked. He told me the numbers and I input them without hesitation. Years of watching people suffer a prolonged death, knowing that we could do nothing but pointlessly extend their lives, had desensitized me to pulling the plug. Immediately, hatches opened on the walls and alarms sounded as water started pouring in, but since the hull had already been partially breached, they quickly collapsed in on themselves. Within seconds, Jennifer had died.
"Let's get out of here,"
Robert said. We ran back towards the central area. We had traversed the entire station to get towards Section A. It was the only remaining escape, but as we got to the offices, we could hear something moving within the walls, knocking their way through the pipes. "The pumps!" Robert yelled. "They're getting in through the fucking pumps!" Talos's pumps were ancient machinery compared to the rest of the station. As the dome was inserted, they needed to move tons of water outside against the immense pressure, but after finishing the station, they had been long since forgotten, left inside the walls while they installed more permanent solutions. Before we could react, the walls broke open, and the Syncatium poured itself through the holes, taking the shape of malformed flesh, extending rapidly against the walls. We were cut off from the escape, with only the office available as temporary refuge from the oncoming swarm of worms and flow of flesh, but our safe haven would quickly become nothing more than another prison to extend our survival. "Won't hold him for long," Robert said. "What now?" Robert went straight for his desk, pulling out a pistol from the top drawer. "You brought a gun to the bottom of the ocean?" I asked. "You didn't?" he shot back. "Never know when you might have to quell a mutiny." He could tell I wasn't amused. We both knew a gun wouldn't slow them down significantly, but any help was welcome. He continued to rummage through the closet in the room, eventually pulling out 2 unused hazmat suits, just like the one I had used while inspecting Mike. "Kept you safe inside the airlock. The worms won't penetrate the suit, right?" Robert asked with pleading eyes. "Look, they breached the EMP suit. One made out of fucking metal. I don't think these will make a big difference. Might slow them down, but that's it." "Oh, it's our best shot." The worms had started to pile up on the door, forming a contracting mesh, slightly cracking the glass. "Now or never. James better have that damn sub ready," Robert said as he got into the suit. He fired a shot. Not at the door, but at the tempered glass wall between it, shattering it to a million cubical pieces as we jumped through. I stumbled to the ground, a few worms getting onto my hands as I stood back up. Robert pulled them off me and shoved me forward. We sputtered for the entrance to Sector A. We were far faster than the worms, but they had formed a mesh, covering most of the ceiling, and dropping down on top of us with each step that we took. Another hole in the wall burst open directly above the airlock towards Section A, causing another slump of meat to land in front of the door. Shit! Robert yelled as he instinctively pulled his weapon and fired at the mass on the floor. It froze in place as the worm disintegrated from the bullet impact, reforming, hastily crawling towards us. I tried to turn and run away, but I didn't react in time. To my surprise, the worms completely ignored my presence and headed straight for Robert, pouring onto him from all directions, pulling him to the ground. He screamed in agony as they formed around his limbs, making him unable to fight back. I hurried towards him and tried to pull them off, but for each worm I removed, 100 others joined in. Within seconds, they managed to tear a hole in the armpit region of his suit. They immediately wriggled themselves into the hole. I tried desperately to pull him up, but he shoved me away as he realized there wasn't any hope left for him. "Get out of here, Doc," he gurgled, as blood started to fill his lungs. I didn't even hesitate, shamefully. I ran for my life, while the Syntium was too distracted by consuming Robert. No matter what I'd done, he was already dead. The hallway narrowed drastically as I once more returned to Section A. I frantically tried to input the code to close the airlock. It took me 2 attempts with shaky fingers to get the correct code, but within a second, the door sealed and I was once more separated from the abomination on the other side. "I'm so sorry, Robert," I whispered to myself. The central dome finally gave in under pressure. Massive streams of water quickly collapsing the ceiling, the station fell apart, and the central power was annihilated under the flood. Plunged into darkness and silence, I ventured forward towards the docking station. While each section of Talos supposedly had their own backup generator, for some reason it hadn't activated, making it hard to navigate through the narrow labyrinth of hallways. "Can anybody hear me?" I called, my voice echoing endlessly. I bumped my head as I saw a light appearing in the distance. James came running towards me holding a flashlight. "Doc, he's still with us. Thank God," he said, his joy quickly fleeting as he realized I'd come alone. "What happened with Jen? The captain?" I just shook my head in response. No words can convey what happened in the dome, and their absence proved enough about their unfortunate outcome. "No time to worry about that now. We need to get out of here. The capsule's just about ready to leave for the surface. We only need Henry to figure out how to get the power back." When he arrived at the docking station, I was relieved by the increase in ceiling height, if only ever so slightly. Henry was busy at work on the control panel, trying to figure out what had cut the power from the backup generator, Abby standing behind him with a flashlight. "God damn it!" he yelled. "Something has torn away the backup generator. Not sure how, but I'm sure I know what. Fucking abyssal demon spawns," he sighed. "Between the lack of power and the damaged hull, the sub can't release from the station. Essentially, we're stranded here." None of us spoke a word, trapped in a tin can 20,000 feet below the surface with no transport. After what felt like an eternity, Henry finally broke the silence. "Well, those are all great ideas, but they won't work," he said sarcastically in response to our lack of solutions. "Well, then, do you have any idea then, genius?" Abby asked. Henry sighed. "As a matter of fact, I do." He walked into the capsule and started messing around with the electronics, eventually pulling off one of the panels. "There are 3 batteries powering this sub. The way I see it, I could take one out and should still have enough power to get you all to the surface." "Us?" James asked. "I need to connect this battery to the airlock," he continued as he pulled one of them out of the capsule. "And then I'll override the door and it'll blow up from the pressure, and the resulting wave of water should forcefully eject the sub." "What about you?" "Well, someone has to stay behind to follow through with the plan." "Then let me do it then," James interjected. "No, you idiot. One wrong connection, the door fries, locking forever. I'm the only one with the expertise. There has to be another way. There isn't. Trust me." James and I looked at one another, both wanting to speak up, but never able to come up with an alternative solution. Henry went back into the transport capsule and sealed the panels shut again. "Look, I wish you were all smarter. Maybe one of you could have stayed behind," he said, as sarcastically as ever. But for the first time, with the slightest smirk on his face. "Thank you," I said. "Yeah, well, time for you to go," he said as he shut the door to the capsule. We watched as Henry walked away for the last time, ready to face his fate. An asshole to the bitter end, but one with a kind heart. Like his other perished crewmates, he would forever remain at the ocean basin, never again witnessing sunlight. Time went on forever while we waited for a wave of water that might just as likely crush us in an instant. But with a ton of luck, we'd be ejected out from the station, and from there we could reach the surface. It would be the most violent takeoff in the station's history, but also the last. Minutes later, we heard the sound of the airlock opening before shattering to pieces under the immense pressure of exploding water and the cincatiel flesh. It only took about 10 seconds for the wave to hit us, and we shot out of the Talos, the hallway behind us falling apart as we did. It hit us hard and roughed us up a bit, but we survived. James took control of the vessel and didn't hesitate to start ascending towards the surface. Abby and I stared out of the tiny window. On the other side, we could see the utterly crushed remains of Talos, dimly illuminated by the light still powered by the generators at Section C, which had been completely covered by the flesh of the cincatium. The thousands of corpses of fish that previously littered the ocean floor had been cleaned up, and were now part of the ever-growing monster from the abyss. A wave of relief washed over me, with my heart calming down for each foot of our ascension. I no longer felt the need to constantly look out the window. The world outside was dark, and whatever life remained down there had been consumed alongside my longing for the ocean. Once we reached a depth of 5,000 feet in the middle of the midnight zone, we managed to establish contact with the USS Orion, calling for an emergency evacuation. They were quite the distance away, but by the time we'd reached the surface, they'd pick us up, albeit curious as to what had happened in the depths. At 3,000 feet, the first rays of daylight greeted us with the warmth of the sun. The ocean started filling up with peaceful life, fish thriving in the waters, completely ignorant of the horrors that existed directly below them. The vast darkness turned into a calming blue. For the first time since being hired for this mission, I felt safe. Before long, we breached the surface. We were greeted by a team wearing hazmat suits as we boarded the ship. We had been unable to alert them of the situation. All they knew was that a potential contagion existed in the depths, one we could have brought back with us, so understandably they locked us in the sickbay, isolated from the rest of the crew. For 72 hours, they pricked and prodded at us, taking multiple blood samples and even a CSF probe. After they all returned normal and no sign of sickness was apparent, they let us into more comfortable living arrangements as we set for shore. After being released from sickbay, I hardly saw James and Abby. They spent most of their time in their rooms, only coming out for the occasional interrogation. Headquarters were incredibly curious as to how a state-of-the-art installation suddenly collapsed. We had absolutely no proof of the events that had transpired. They needed someone to blame, but as part of the CDC and not the original Talos crew, I was safe from prosecution. All that was required of me was to sign a non-disclosure agreement, one I'm breaking right now, to warn you about the horrors of the abyss. We know more about what exists in our outer space than we do about the life in our own oceans, and that's how it should remain forever. These creatures, the cincatium, can't be killed. As long as one single cell remains, it'd be enough to restart their hives. And I fear that with the consumption of Talos, we may have learned about life on the surface. Now that I'm posting this, I'm heading for the Center of Disease Control. I can feel the worms wriggling inside my chest as I type. Ready to burst out at any moment, I'm guessing the suit didn't protect me after all. I hope James and Abby are safe. that they get a second chance at living a happy life. And I'm so sorry for all of this, for what's to come. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to give a big thank you to you for watching tonight's video, or listening to tonight's podcast episode, for clicking on this MrCreepyPasta Storytime. Before I wish you sweet dreams tonight, I just wanted to give a big thank you to Taysia-lynn, Genobaga-Arneho, Erik Mary, Daniel Poulsen, Trace Smiles, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Wayne Milstead, Ken Lando Higuchi, Brianna Tine-Janzen, Nicholas Saeid Alyain, Buddy Burroughs, Tyler Ramberg, Goonington, G. Weevil 3, Diana Kraus, Asia, Gabrielle de Baca, TheRedOakShieldVirus, Sandy Barney, Melissa Sweigart, Chompski, Daniel Rao, The Ginger Bros, Robert Ramirez, Andrew Stenberg, Holy Realm, Ralph Rodriguez, and Dr. Strawberry. These guys are the friggin' amazing people from Patreon who help me stay alive. If you guys would like to help support the show as well, you can always check me out at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta and get your name either shown here at the end of the credits or in the description down below. And you can check out this podcast here on YouTube or here on Spotify or Apple iTunes Podcast or Google Play Podcast, whichever one you happen to go to. I mean, seriously, if you're on YouTube right now and you look down in the description, there's like a whole list of different playlists that you can be able to watch, like hours upon hours upon hours of content. If you want to get your horror story creepypasta fix, it's all there, as well as like a live stream. Oh, and also my wife sells Dungeons and Dragons themed tea. Etsy.com/ivorymonocletea. Links are also down below. Sweet dreams, everybody.